After a long journey and countless battles, humanity's best players were finally defeated. They gathered from all over the world to defend the fate of the people, but their strength was not enough. The outer gods brought this war to an end in cold blood and achieved final victory. The destroyed world left no doubt that it was no longer possible to save it. It was difficult for each of the survivors to accept that all attempts to change their fate had failed. Even one of the strongest players felt the oppressive hopelessness of what was happening. Jack managed to survive and escape from hell, but he was never able to get through the tower to the very end. His personal squad perished in the final battle, leaving no chance for salvation. It seemed like this was the final end, and humanity was about to fall into the abyss. Some were ready to accept defeat and their fate. Others desperately tried to make a difference, waving their weapons at the void. But the external gods turned out to be too strong and merciless to people. Just when hope was about to fade, he appeared. The god of time named Kronos, one of the most powerful beings in the entire galaxy. In his hands was a watch that could turn back the flow of time. He offered the strongest player in the world to go back in time and start all over again. All accumulated power will disappear, but knowledge about the future will remain. An unbearable burden will fall on his shoulders, which no one else can cope with. It sounded wrong and too late, but there was no other choice. Friends advised me to take a risk, because humanity would not have another chance. Jack knew it wasn't the god's mercy, but he still accepted the offer. This man adapted to the tower faster than others and fought with the strongest creatures. That's why he was entrusted with the opportunity to change everything. Finally, his comrades wished him good luck, knowing that they would not meet again. When he returns, they will no longer remember this farewell. Kronos activated the time mechanism, and Jack's consciousness was torn away from his dying body. Everything that happened lost its meaning because he got a second chance. After a blinding flash, he woke up in his own young body. Now he is an ordinary student who has to start his journey all over again. All characteristics disappeared, and there was no trace left of the former strength. At this moment, a local bully named Nick decided to find a new victim. He always liked to beat up the weak and assert himself at the expense of others. In the past, this guy kept the entire university in fear. However, today everything ended faster than he expected. Despite the loss of skills, the experience of a past life has not disappeared. A few precise movements were enough to send Nick to the hospital. On December 31st, 2019, people still didn't know what awaited them. It was an ordinary evening in Seoul, filled with anticipation of the new year. The townspeople were preparing for the holiday, unaware of the impending disaster. Nick, humiliated by the defeat, was thirsty for revenge and was beside himself. He went out to celebrate with friends, trying to forget what had happened. The noisy company laughed and relaxed, but Nick himself was immersed in anger. He replayed the fight with Jack in his head over and over again. For such a person, this humiliation was a real shame. Meanwhile, the main character knew what would happen in just a few minutes. He calmly gathered the necessary things and prepared himself for the nightmare to begin. When Nick and his friends went outside, they noticed an arrogant Jack with a strange suitcase. The drunken hooligans decided to take advantage of the moment and attack a defenseless passerby. Jack deliberately ignored them, expecting something completely different. He knew that very soon these people would have much more serious problems. At the right moment, he was completely ready for what was happening. His cold gaze made it clear that he was acting deliberately. When the new year arrived, all of humanity felt a terrible pressure. The world began to change right before our eyes, breaking the familiar reality. The outer gods have finally reached Earth. A brutal survival tutorial has begun for people. There were thousands of unsuspecting residents in this area of the city. The zombie invasion was expected to last more than half an hour. These creatures craved only one thing: human flesh. Very soon the streets will be filled with blood, and only the strongest will survive. Each selected person received a system that could help them survive. The world around us has turned into a brutal game with levels and skills. Those who cannot adapt will be the first to die. For most people, this was the beginning of the end, while for Jack, it was a chance to make things right. Last time he failed to save humanity, but now he has experience and knowledge of the future. He was going to thwart the plans of the gods and change the course of history. This time had to be the last. because humanity deserves a second chance. The main danger of the zombies was not their strength, but their numbers, which filled the streets of the area in minutes. Slow-moving mutants surrounded players, blocking escape routes and turning familiar neighborhoods into deadly traps. Alone, these creatures were weak and clumsy, but in a crowd they broke any resistance of unprepared people. Most were unprepared for such a nightmare and did not understand how to act in the conditions of a real massacre. Panic forced people to rush about, waste their energy, and make mistakes that were not forgiven in the new world. The area was plunged into chaos. The streets were filled with blood and screams, and the events began to resemble the end of the world. Amidst the general panic, Jack remained calm and collected, in complete control of the situation around him. He kept his distance and did not allow the zombies to form a dense crowd, constantly monitoring the direction of movement. Jack knew that monsters felt no pain and continued to attack even after fatal injuries. Their poisonous bite made any miss fatal, so close combat meant certain death. It was not luck or a special gift, but the experience of a past life, gained at the cost of many losses. In the midst of the battle, Jack remembered a conversation with a comrade from the tower who once shared important knowledge. Over the years of fighting, he learned that zombies have a vulnerability: ordinary sea salt. Preparing for the disaster, Jack knew in advance that the first test would be an encounter with these very monsters. His young body quickly tired, and injuries and exhaustion accumulated with every minute of the fight. Therefore, he prepared a supply of salt in advance, planning to use it only in moments of complete despair. Meanwhile, Nick and his company did not lose their heads and began to fight, relying on brute force and desperation. They managed to destroy several dozen zombies, but what was happening around them still remained unclear. The monsters gradually tightened the circle, blocking escape routes and leaving no room for escape. The boys continued to fight until the very end, refusing to accept the thought of their own death. When they were finally surrounded and hope began to fade, the situation suddenly changed. The spilled salt disrupted the zombies' movement and briefly turned the tide of the battle. At that moment, Jack wasn't thinking about saving other people and wasn't trying to look like a hero. He was only interested in clearing the space and his own survival in this chaos. Each destroyed monster earned points, directly affecting his future chances. After the wave ended, the system announced that the task had been completed, and Jack's stats increased. Along with the other survivors, he heard the cold voice of a deity summing up the ordeal. People were congratulated on their victory, but made to understand that this was only the beginning of a new nightmare. Now everyone had to accept the changed reality and learn to live by the new rules. Only those who became stronger and acted without panic or hesitation could survive. For completed missions, players received points that could be used for power-ups. Transactions between people were also allowed, where the price was resources and future security. This did not make man a god, but it gave him an advantage in a world where force was decisive. From this moment on, the real struggle for level, resources, and the right to survive began. The system didn't give us time to rest and immediately prepared a new test. A safe zone appeared in the center of the district, looking like a temporary shelter. This marked the official start of the second tutorial and a sharp increase in the danger level. Nick tried to come to his senses, realizing that the familiar world had collapsed in just a few minutes and no longer obeyed the old rules. Looking around the ruined streets, he spotted Jack, the same guy who looked eerily calm amid the chaos. Jack didn't fuss or panic, as if he knew in advance what would happen next and where it would all lead. Nick realized that this man knew much more than all the other survivors in the area. He ran up and grabbed Jack by the shoulder, demanding an explanation and at least some certainty. Jack coldly removed his hand and said that now it was every man for himself and only the strongest would survive. He advised Nick to stay in the safe zone unless he was willing to risk his own life. However, the barrier was closed and the system indifferently threw some of the people back into the battle zone. A new test began immediately, and instead of zombies, huge bloodworms burst out from under the ground. The monsters appeared suddenly and dragged people under the asphalt before they had time to react. Most of the survivors were unprepared for such an enemy, but Jack expected exactly this. he acted preemptively, was the first to destroy the worm, and received several hundred points from the system. These creatures were unnoticed until the last moment and attacked from underground without warning. In such a battle, it was not the eyes that decided the matter, but intuition and experience, which allowed one to sense the enemy in advance. At the right moment, Jack would draw his sword and deliver a precise blow, leaving the worms no chance. His past life experience allowed him to act calmly and quickly level up in battle. With each monster he destroyed, he could challenge increasingly dangerous opponents. Jack deliberately descended into the subway, away from the chaos of the open streets and random collisions. He knew that underground, it was easier to control the space and behavior of earthworms. This underground dungeon became the perfect place for him to hunt and quickly strengthen. All we had to do was maintain the pace and not make any unnecessary mistakes. The tunnels quickly filled with the slippery green blood of the dismembered monsters. Jack methodically destroyed the worms and extracted their mana essence, strengthening himself after each battle. His goal remained unchanged: to survive until the completion of the second test. For most people, this proved to be a virtually impossible task. Hours of continuous fighting turned survival into a living hell, even for the most resilient. The system has shrunk the safe zone again, forcing hundreds of people back into the fight. In the changed world, everyone survived for themselves, sacrificing others for their own salvation. Under these conditions, people quickly began to show their worst sides, as if the old rules no longer held true. Many people broke down morally and became no less like monsters than the zombies and worms around them. One of these people was Nick, who for the first time felt that he was now allowed more than usual. He had no intention of dying just like that, and had already mentally accepted that he would have to sacrifice others for the sake of life. If before he was just a bully, now he could become a real problem for those who are weaker. Nick realized that in the new world, power could be obtained through dirty methods, and he liked the idea. One of the old men caught his attention, and Nick took a slow step, as if weighing his options. While one man was sliding deeper into the dark side, another was moving forward in a completely different direction. Jack chose the path of development and evolution because he knew that in the tower, it is not those who seek ease who win. For the first time since returning to the past, he felt real fatigue, which weighed on his body and thoughts. He had already defeated many monsters, but his body was gradually giving in, and this was felt with every passing minute. Jack understood that any mistake here cost his life, so he was forced to act more precisely and carefully. Losing the chance to fix everything would mean condemning humanity to destruction again, and he had no right to fail. Now his goal was specific: clear the metro and survive until the end of the second tutorial. This could only be done through leveling up and increasing mana, otherwise the body simply wouldn't be able to keep up. In the new world, mana will become the foundation of future strength, and one of the most important characteristics of any player. While most people didn't realize it, Jack was already doing everything he could to raise his mana as high as possible. At some point he stopped and looked carefully into the dark metro corridor, listening to the silence. Jack felt like he was being watched and decided not to hide, but to check who exactly was watching from the darkness. Suddenly, a voice actually came from the darkness, confirming that his instincts had not failed him. The very fact of the conversation meant one thing: the young student had already attracted the attention of those who stood above the players. From the opened portal, a small assistant of the deity appeared, like a courier of someone else's will. Jack immediately took advantage of the opportunity and decided to spend his accumulated points while he still had the opportunity. He asked to open a shop and became one of the first players to buy skills after the second trial. His gaze did not dart around, because he knew in advance what he needed to take and why exactly it would be useful. The first purchase was the monkey eyes, and the price of 2,000 points clearly showed their value. He then acquired a mana sword, which enhanced his basic stats and gave him an advantage in protracted combat. Having finished his shopping, Jack calmly got ready to continue the test, as if he had done a routine technical job. He didn't want to attract any unnecessary attention, because he was still afraid that his time reversal might be noticed. It is quite possible that the gods already know the truth and are simply watching to see his second failure. Kronos, who returned him to the past, paid too high a price for it, and disappeared from the world as punishment. He sacrificed himself because he could not accept injustice and refused to be a bystander. Remembering Kronos, Jack felt a sense of obligation to see this through and not betray this act. With monkey eyes, his vision widened and his perception became sharper, as if the world had become sharper and closer. Now he needed to improve his skills and prepare for what lay ahead without wasting a second. Time was running out, and the worms were becoming more dangerous. As if they had learned from the blood and fear of people, they had already managed to absorb many. And this made them stronger and more aggressive with each new victim. The next half hour promised to be a difficult test, even for a player with experience from a past life. Things were further complicated by Jack encountering the second tutorial's boss, the Mother of Worms. This creature looked in such a way that there could be no talk of beauty here under any circumstances. Jack realized that there was no time for mistakes, and if he didn't stop the monster, the entire soul area would suffer. He jumped high into the air, evading the attack, and in mid-flight, he managed to notice the enemy's weak spot. This was only possible thanks to the monkey eyes, which showed what was hidden from others. He landed the first truly heavy blow, but immediately realized that with this opponent, everything would be different and much more difficult. The mother worm's armor turned out to be significantly denser than that of ordinary creatures and almost completely absorbed direct damage. Even with all his strength, Jack could only scratch the boss's shell, clearly realizing that brute force was not enough here. Winning required pushing himself to the limit, and Jack was prepared to push his own limits. He gathered all the accumulated mana, increasing the pressure and forcing the body to work beyond the limits of possibility. As green blood seeped out from under the armor, a brief smile appeared on his face. There was still a chance. This injury meant that the mission could be completed if the pace was maintained and no mistakes were made. Jack moved with precision and composure, swinging his sword and dodging attacks, not allowing the monster to establish a rhythm. Feeling his strength rapidly fading, he sped up, realizing that a protracted battle would end in his death. By this point, the Mother of Worms had lost her composure and went all in, unleashing all her might in one attack. Two forces collided in the narrow space of the metro, and for a moment, it seemed as if time itself stood still. His heart skipped a beat, the world slowed down, and Jack put everything he had left into the blade. The mana-enhanced blow pierced the defenses, and the monstrous boss finally collapsed, ending the second trial. At the same moment, people at the top were finally losing their humanity, choosing survival at any cost. To stay in the safe zone, Nick began to consciously sacrifice others without the slightest hesitation. His decisions caused the deaths of old people, and he realized that he was willing to continue as long as it brought him profit. The shrinking zone forced new victims, turning the remnants of civilization into brutal jungles. Nick accepted the rules of the game, thinking only of himself, while women, children, and the weak were left without a chance of salvation. With seconds left before the final catastrophe, the countdown suddenly stopped, breaking the chain of deaths. The system announced that the safe zone would no longer shrink, giving the survivors a brief respite. Players received extra points and recovery time without knowing the cost. Meanwhile, in the subway, a tired and wounded Jack was recovering from a fight that almost cost him his life. Victory was hard-won, but his past life experience allowed him to survive where others would have perished long ago. He again encountered the system's assistant, who did not hide his surprise at the strength of the seemingly ordinary student. Jack was offered a reward for killing the boss, including risky options that would allow him to advance quickly. Among the proposals was contact with Olympus, one of the most powerful guilds standing at the level of the gods. It looked tempting, especially given Kronos' connection to Olympus, but it made Jack suspicious. He realized that the assistant had no right to promote such alliances and was acting in defiance of the manager. Not wanting to become a pawn in someone else's game, Jack abandoned the tricks and opted for an honest reward of points. Immediately after this, he demanded to see the tutorial director, whose name was Joshua. The system reacted instantly, and the assistant turned noticeably pale, realizing the consequences of his actions. A portal opened in the metro, and the manager appeared in person. interested in the unconventional player. Today, Jack has destroyed over 1,000 undead and earned the right to be heard. Joshua looked closely at the player, trying to understand how an ordinary student knew such things and such rules. Jack didn't explain anything, calmly making it clear that he wasn't obliged to reveal his secrets even to the manager. Such audacity seemed risky, but instead of anger, Joshua felt an interest in this unusual player. Jack explained the purpose of the meeting and pointed out the assistant who was acting behind his back and breaking the rules of the tutorial. He directly stated that he was profiting from the guild and influencing strong players into disadvantageous alliances. Joshua could no longer contain his rage as he realized that Olympus had interfered even at the initial level of the trials. With one movement of his huge hand, he destroyed his assistant, turning him into a shapeless pool of blood. The manager was disgusted to realize that rot had reached the system he controlled. Thanks to Jack, this problem was solved, and from that moment on, an unspoken trust developed between them. In recognition, Joshua extended his hand, initiating the award transfer without further ado. One touch was enough for new power to rush into Jack's body, rebuilding it from the inside. The Mana Master skill has increased energy recovery and resistance to hostile influences. Mana filled his body, but instead of euphoria, Jack felt only calm confidence and control. For him, this was not an achievement, but just another step towards a long-lost peak. Joshua said that they still had to meet, and now it was time for Jack to prepare for the third test. The manager disappeared, leaving behind the feeling that the system had begun to take the player seriously. The mana concentration reached the average level, and normal monsters ceased to pose a threat. However, Jack was not under any illusions, realizing that his true goal was still far away. Using the remaining time, he slowly cleared the subway, honing his control and movements. The sword dance flared again and again, leaving behind only green blood and silence. Above, the city changed much more terribly than in the dungeons, and monsters were no longer the main threat here. People began to act cruelly and cold-bloodedly, finally accepting the New World Order. Nick gathered a group around him, casting out the weak and deciding who deserved to live. He acted as if he himself had become a judge, enjoying power over others. At that moment, a man appeared on the street who looked alien and out of place in the new world. It was Jack, calmly returning from the subway, as if all the chaos did not affect him. A huge worm burst out of the ground, but the attack looked pathetic and belated. Jack dodged effortlessly, breaking the monster's skull with one movement. Green blood covered the asphalt, and silence reigned all around again. Nick recognized his classmate, and for the first time felt not anger, but fear. In front of him stood a man of a completely different level, and this was clear without a single word. Nick intuitively understood that it was better not to tempt fate now, so he chose the safest option for himself, to pretend. He pretended that he and Jack were old friends who had met by chance after a long separation in a new, cruel world. This outward friendliness was merely an act, hiding fear and recent actions. Looking around, Jack noticed people who had been forcibly pushed outside the safe zone. They were forced to carry provisions and do dirty work, while others hid quietly behind the barrier. Jack didn't pretend that nothing was happening, and immediately expressed his attitude towards what he saw. He made it clear that Nick had crossed the line because too many people had died because of his decisions. Nick tried to justify himself, claiming that it was simply impossible to survive in this world any other way. According to him, the old rules no longer apply, and now only the strongest survives. Just like in a real jungle, the tension between them was growing, and it was clear that a little more, and the conflict would become irreversible. However, instead of a fight, the system intervened and declared the current stage of the test complete. All survivors were automatically awarded the points they had earned, depriving them of the opportunity to continue the dispute. Before they were separated, Jack warned Nick one last time not to cross that line again. He said that such a path always ends the same way, even if it seems profitable now. Nick just chuckled, considering the threat an empty bluff, but the system no longer gave them the opportunity to check it. Almost immediately, the third stage of the test, called the Hunt, was announced. Now each player had to collect 50 mana essences before the time ran out. At the end of the term, The area will be destroyed along with all those who fail to complete the task. Those who had recently been victims were now forced to become hunters. In the first minutes, there was confusion, and most people simply did not understand what to do next. Many remained in the safe zone because it was the only place where they felt the illusion of protection. But everyone knew that without the required number of entities, the test would end in death for them. For Jack, this stage did not present any serious difficulty. He had already managed to collect much more than the required minimum in previous battles. The increased flow of mana turned ordinary monsters into easy prey. He destroyed them without much effort, but he did not allow himself to relax. Jack understood that the real threat would come later, and he needed to prepare for it in advance. His body gradually remembered the lost skills, returning precision and control of movements. The path remained long, but the first glimmers of its former strength were already beginning to appear. The third test was designed to last 72 hours without a break. A day later, most of the players survived, but only because they were hiding in a safe zone. Those who dared to go outside looked exhausted, scared, and unsure. A small group of players descended into the subway, deciding that it was safer underground than the chaotic streets. They didn't know that in the new world, such decisions often become the last ones. For the first few minutes, the tunnel seemed empty and quiet, creating a dangerous illusion of control. Everything changed when a sharp metallic creak was heard from the depths of the corridor. A mutated spider burst out of the darkness, moving faster than the humans could react. With one lunge, he killed the unprepared player, leaving him no chance to resist. The others froze. Their bodies refused to obey, and fear paralyzed every movement. Even when they took up arms, they acted too slowly and hesitantly. Katie and Mark had been friends for many years, but the new world made no allowance for the past. When the rats pounced on the girl, her desperate defense proved useless. Mark rushed forward trying to save his friend, but there were too many opponents. Over the past few days, there have been thousands of similar tragedies, not only in the city, but all over the world. However, it was here that fate made a rare exception. A man appeared from the shadows and cut down the monster with one precise movement. Katie didn't even have time to understand who saved her and what exactly happened. She didn't know that all this time, Jack had been sleeping peacefully in the subway until the screams tore him out of his sleep. Katie held her breath as she watched the stranger calmly dispatch the monsters, using the items at hand as if it were the most ordinary thing. In a situation like this, a man like Nick would have walked away without a doubt. And it was this choice that would inevitably lead to his downfall in the future. Jack may appear selfish and act calculatingly, but he will never turn a blind eye to the killing of innocent people. Having drawn his sword, he immediately got down to business, deciding to finally clear the underground metro tunnels of the creatures. After increasing the flow of mana, the battle became noticeably easier, although especially large monsters still posed a serious threat. I had to give it my all, finding myself on the edge several times and receiving significant injuries. But the result remained the same: Jack's absolute superiority over the monsters of this dungeon. The surviving players looked at him in silent amazement, not believing their own eyes or what was happening around them. They thanked him for saving them, gradually realizing that the ordeal was far from over. Toxic substances were already circulating in their blood, and without immediate treatment, most of them would not have survived until the morning. Without further ado, Jack handed them the medicinal pills he had purchased for huge sums of system points. Such medicines were not available to everyone, and their value in the new world was difficult to overestimate. Mark was likely to survive, although there was still a risk of losing his arm permanently. Jack himself slept for more than 6 hours, but even that was not enough to restore his strength. His young body was not yet hardened, and the stress of the last 24 hours was making itself felt. Hours of continuous battles gradually destroyed the body, despite all past experience. He was already getting ready to continue resting and recovering, realizing that things would only get harder. But the terrified Katie and Mark desperately tried to stop him, grasping at him as if it were their last chance. They understood perfectly well that without such a mentor, they would not survive even the next hour. Jack never sought alliances and preferred to act alone for the sake of speed and efficiency. However, after thinking for a while, he realized that he could use these players without any unnecessary risk to himself. He led them deeper into the dungeon and immediately warned them that things would get much more dangerous further on. Each of them had one last chance to return to the top and hide in relative safety. Jack honestly said that he could not guarantee survival because they were still too weak. But the newcomers had already fallen under the influence of his power and decided to take a risk, despite their fear. They said they were ready to go all the way for the experience and the chance to change their destiny. In response, Jack offered a deal where everyone would receive their share of the reward if they survived. Their role was simple and extremely dangerous: to become bait for monsters in the depths of the dungeon. Mark clearly didn't like this idea, and fear was clearly visible on his face. He panicked and called for help, while Jack just calmly watched the reaction. Oddly enough, this is what quickly attracted the attention of the huge snake. When the monster came into view, the hunter emerged from hiding and struck first. The monster did not expect such speed and missed the fatal blow even before the fight began. After the successful attack, the group continued clearing the dungeon using the same scheme. Again and again they used the same trick, luring the monsters into a trap. Jack would appear suddenly and mercilessly cut the creatures into pieces, leaving them no chance. A few hours later, Mark looked completely drained, but he knew he had made this choice himself. Through this collaboration, he and Katie began to steadily collect mana essences. This meant that they would be able to pass the test and move on to the next level. It is here that Jack's character is revealed especially clearly. He uses people as a tool, but at the same time does not refuse to help and save those who can still survive. By this point, Jack had collected far more mana essence than was required to pass the test. Why he needed so many cores remained a mystery, but it was clear that this man always acted according to plan. People like Jack rarely make unnecessary movements, and everything that happened was just preparation for the climax. He continued to give advice to his temporary allies, fully aware that their paths would soon diverge. When Mark realized that he would have to fight on his own at the next level, his face turned pale with horror. All this time, he subconsciously expected that Jack would be there and would cover him at any moment. Katie also remained part of the team and played her important role in this dangerous plan. The girl confidently coped with the task, attracting the monsters and distracting their attention. If Mark had had even half the confidence she had, things might have turned out differently. Now it was Jack's turn to finish what he had planned and carry out his part of the plan. His instructions had an unexpected effect on Mark, awakening in him a desperate motivation. The guy actually entered the battle and fought the monsters with the savagery of a hunted animal. His level has increased significantly, as have Katie's, who went through the same hell. Soon the cleanup was completed and the team received their well-deserved reward. The joint hunt sped up the collection of entities several times over, but the collaboration came to an end. There were less than 3 hours left until the end of the task, and it was time to go to the surface. By this time, the city streets were filled with uneasy tension and growing chaos. The portal to the next level turned an ominous red color, clearly hinting at danger. The people divided into groups and seemed to be waiting for the inevitable collision. Most were never able to collect the required amount of mana essences. Brothers Dominic and Harry gathered a small gang around themselves, preparing for the inevitable bloody denouement. They quickly realized that mana essences could be obtained not only by killing monsters, but also by killing other people. It is enough to take the life of a player, and the reward will be the same, without any difference for the system. Nick immediately caught this loophole and decided to use the new rule exclusively to his advantage. People gathered around him, in whose eyes there was almost nothing human left. They were willing to kill without hesitation, just to gain the right to move on to the next level. To avoid starting a fight right away, Nick proposed a compromise that was more like outright blackmail. He demanded that the required amount of mana essence be handed over to him, promising to spare the others in exchange. Such humiliation was difficult to accept, but there was little choice. Harry became visibly nervous, realizing that his team was too small to withstand a direct confrontation. Retreat seemed the only sensible option, no matter how humiliating it might be. The tension reached its peak when a new group of players emerged from the dark opening of the subway. Jack walked at the head, calmly carrying a strange and obviously heavy box in his hands. He was not seen for several days, And all this time, he was preparing his own party. Opening the box, Jack revealed a massive amount of collected mana essences. There were more than 1,000 cores inside, and he wasn't showing them off to show off. Nick's hands began to tremble, and greed instantly took over his mind. Behind him stood a crowd of people ready to carry out any order. One word would have been enough to tear Jack apart on the spot. However, he himself remained completely calm, as if he was in complete control of the situation. Jack drew a circle around himself and coldly ordered no one to cross that line. He announced that he was ready to sell mana essences for 100 points each. The price was high, but in return, players received a guaranteed promotion to the next level. Some called it robbery. Others thanked fate for the only chance to survive. Nick wasn't used to paying for something that could be taken away by force. He refused to play by other people's rules, relying on his influence and cruelty. This choice clearly showed that he did not realize that his end was already very near. Nick, with obvious mockery, hinted that people simply did not have that many points to pay for, although Jack himself did not care at all. He calmly made it clear that he was not forcing anyone to pay, and was only providing an opportunity to those who truly wanted to survive. Arguments began among those gathered, because people did not have a unanimous opinion on how to proceed in this situation. Nick didn't even try to hide his indignation, and openly began to accuse his classmate. He confidently stated that Jack simply killed someone, took all the mana essences, and is now profiting from poor and desperate people. Mark and Katie intervened in the conflict, deciding to tell how everything really happened. They saw Nick go crazy and wanted to show people that Jack was a man they could trust. They saw with their own eyes his honesty and voluntarily became guarantors of the deal. However, the greedy and aggressive people did not want to listen to anything. They raised their weapons and rushed forward, determined to take everything by brute force. As soon as the first of the insolent ones crossed the drawn border, their heads instantly flew off their shoulders. It looked cruel and at the same time frighteningly beautiful, as if the fight had been calculated in advance down to the last detail. One precise movement was enough to decapitate 2 scoundrels at once. The rest of the gang didn't have time to stop and almost immediately shared the same fate. Jack had warned Nick in advance about such consequences. He told him not to cross the line, but the former bully chose to ignore these words. Now he and all his allies have paid dearly for it. Jack had long been trained to kill monsters, but he acted without hesitation in battles with people. His basic combat skills were enough to make his opponents feel almost no resistance. Even numerical superiority created only temporary difficulties without affecting the outcome of the battle. The conflict, which had been building and escalating for a long time, finally reached a harsh and logical conclusion. A few minutes later, Nick was the only survivor. He waited for the right moment and attacked from behind like a cowardly rat. Nick didn't realize that even during the battle, Jack was watching him closely all the time. At the moment of truth, the protagonist mercilessly executed the bastard, leaving him no chance. Now the streets of the area were cleared of immoral pigs. Everyone who stood aside realized that it was better not to joke with Jack, because this man was extremely serious. It's not every day you see one man single-handedly destroy an entire crowd. Harry was the first to dare to pay points for mana essences. For this, he was even ready to sell his own sword, realizing that otherwise he would not advance to the next level. People looked at Jack and gradually realized that such a box of cores could not be simply stolen. He was too strong and talented, which meant he acquired every essence in the battle with the monsters. At the same time, Jack got exactly what he wanted. He initially collected entities not for the sake of power, but for the sake of a profitable exchange at the right moment. Within a few seconds, Harry had calmly progressed to the next level. The other surviving residents of the area followed his example. People sold the last available items just to escape this hell. The trade continued until Jack had no essence left. Mark and Katie wanted to wait for him and move on together. But Jack was never one to make allies. Now he had his own path to follow, and he didn't want to take any burdens with him. He gave them some short advice and said that perhaps they would meet again in the future. Now they had to prove their worth on their own, without his help. The most alarming thing was that Jack had used up absolutely all of his essence, and it was unclear how he was going to get through the next stage. The frightened friends looked at each other nervously, trying to understand what exactly he had planned and what he was preparing for. But Jack, as always, was in no hurry to reveal his intentions. He remained mysterious and coldly collected, only ordering them to pass through the portal as quickly as possible, because real chaos was about to begin here very soon. Not all players were lucky enough to collect the required number of entities in advance, and many survivors were doomed to remain in the area. The first test was survival. Then came competition, after which the hunt began, and now the system was preparing a new stage. The fourth tutorial was about defense, and for those who hadn't had time to prepare, it promised to turn into a real hell. The area was finally becoming a battlefield, where everyone would have to risk their lives for the last chance to move on. On paper, it looked like a second chance, but in reality, the chances of success remained alarmingly low. While he still had some free time, Jack decided to contact Joshua. He was going to open a store and spend the points he had earned as quickly as possible, leaving nothing for later. At the same time, Joshua reduced his staff of assistants and began to recruit new allies, not shying away from dirty methods. He had already had to stain his hands with blood in order to control the system, and this was far from the first time for him. Joshua warned that the gods had begun to take an interest in the genius player who was gaining influence too quickly. Jack made too many deals and attracted too much attention, becoming a prominent figure in the eyes of the higher powers. He was not only a talented fighter, but also a dangerously calculating strategist, able to take advantage of any situation. In the future, he should have been more careful and disappeared from the sight of the gods for a while. But now Jack was going to use the store to its full potential and get elite-level equipment. Selling essences was originally part of the plan to completely overhaul gear. With so many opportunities opening up before Jack, he didn't hesitate to upgrade his sword, strengthening it to the limit. He then acquired a new shield, robe, and reinforced boots, greatly increasing his defense and mobility. In just a few moments, he looked like a hero from a big-budget movie, fully prepared for disaster. In addition to the equipment, rare artifacts were purchased, including a legendary crystal. Jack spent almost no time choosing items because he knew in advance exactly what he would need. Now no ordinary participant could cause him serious harm. Joshua was looking forward to seeing this guy fight the creatures of the abyss with genuine anticipation. The shopping was coming to an end, and the player's free time was quickly running out. The system announced the start of the fourth tutorial, leaving no time for reflection. This meant that the area would be completely destroyed, along with everyone who did not have time to adapt. The sky turned blood red, and the air became heavy and suffocating. Even the smell was reminiscent of hot metal and promised a bloody battle in advance. In the whole city, perhaps only Jack did not give in to panic and was happy with the purchase of elite equipment. Having donned the robe of the fire spell, he was no longer afraid of heat and flame. The remaining survivors ran through the streets in panic, gradually sinking into complete agony. Their eyes had long since lost their human expression because they had already realized that this was the end. If you hesitated even for a second, the fiery rays would incinerate the weaker players. The destruction began, and at that moment, a giant appeared in the sky. The streets quickly filled with lower-level demons that had burst forth from hell. There were so many of them that the resemblance to a zombie apocalypse arose naturally. But the real essence of the test was not in these hordes at all. The main source of horror for the survivors was a completely different monster. The lesser demon Sutra appeared out of nowhere, its purple eyes flashing, covering the area with a wave of primal fear. Any other player would have lost control of their emotions and gone mad at the sight of this terrifying monster. Jack, on the contrary, grinned because he had been looking forward to meeting his old and extremely dangerous acquaintance for a long time. During Ragnarok, this demon was the size of a mountain, but now it looked noticeably smaller. It was precisely this moment that needed to be taken advantage of before Sutra gained its true power. The demon was sure that another world would disappear, being swallowed up by the tower. Jack thought otherwise and was going to do everything to prevent this from happening. He activated the eyes of his friend from his past life, an artifact he had always considered one of the most powerful weapons a fighter could have. A short but tense conversation ensued between the player and the demon. Sutra mocked the man and claimed that he did not have the strength to stop the destruction. Jack responded not with words, but with action, immediately going on the offensive. An explosion tore through the space. Everything around was engulfed in flames, and then thick smoke covered the battlefield. When the fire dispersed, even the demons realized that the player didn't have a single scratch on him. The cloak completely protected him from the heat, clearly demonstrating the value of perfect preparation. These artifacts were collected not for protection, but for hunting. In fact, Jack came here to hunt a demon named Sutra, but first, he had to pass through hordes of his enemy's followers. Aggressive skeletons fiercely blocked the path to the boss, rushing from all sides. Despite their numbers, they remained fragile and too weak. One precise blow with a sword was enough to break their spines. To Jack, it looked more like a warm-up than a real fight. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that the main battle was still ahead. Hours of continuous fighting were taking their toll, and fatigue was gradually building up. The cloak dampened the fiery attacks, but the body still felt the scorching heat. The shield withstood blow after blow, but its shape began to lose its former integrity. This couldn't go on forever, and Jack needed to get to the main demon as quickly as possible. Sutra himself came out to meet them and dealt a crushing blow. His reaction was enough to dodge, but Jack immediately realized that this was only the beginning. The demon mocked the man, continuing to talk even during the fight. He sincerely didn't understand why such a talented player, capable of becoming a ranker, ended up here. Why is he fighting in this hell instead of climbing the tower? Jack calmly replied that all this was needed for only one purpose: to kill the strongest demon of this stage. His words acted like a curse, and Sutra was truly enraged. The demon's blows became sweeping and predictable. This was exactly what Jack was counting on. Knowing that the chances of a fair fight were too slim, he forced the enemy to act on emotions, countering them with cold calculation. At the right moment, Jack deliberately took the blow, as if he had made a fatal mistake. Sutra felt relieved and didn't even understand why the fight suddenly ended. Looking around, he did not find the body of the slain enemy. All this time, Jack remained alive and used the fight to level up. This was precisely why he was stalling for time, preparing to activate the skill his friend had told him about. At that very moment, the monkey eyes completed their evolution. From that moment on, Jack gained powerful fire resistance, finally turning the tide of the battle. Jack looked at his opponent and clearly felt that in his current state, he would not be able to cope without additional reinforcements. The young body was too weak and undeveloped, so it needed the help of the ice crystal and the ice jade sword. Only the combination of these artifacts gave him a real chance to survive in battle. First, Jack needed to get close to the enemy, who continued to attack furiously. He had to constantly dodge and in no case fall under the crushing blows. It sounded simple in words, but in reality, every mistake could be the last. Jack defended himself with all his might, and the stifling heat made it impossible to take a full breath. By this point, almost all of the players in the area had been destroyed. He remained one of the few who still fought to advance to the next level. Finally, the artifacts began to work, and the icy energy began to resist the destructive fire. This was even reflected on Sutra's face, which for the first time in a long time was distorted with surprise. Usually his flame burned through his enemies, leaving them no chance. But today it was different, because the player withstood the pressure and tried to counterattack. Jack's first blow was accurate, but not devastating enough. For the demon, it was just a scratch that did not restrict his movements. To win, Jack had to be much more aggressive. Constant defense could not lead to victory. With the activation of the Flame Eye technique, the battle prediction began. Jack began to catch his opponent's movements before they turned into blows. He had to feed on the ice crystal again and again to contain the heat that was melting his body. Now even the cloak couldn't cope completely, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe. With a body like that, he couldn't fight for too long. There was only one way out: to take a risk and go all in right now. It was a bet on everything, on which his life depended. Jack was no longer fighting just for the next level, but also for the expectations of those who believed in him. He came a long way, suffered a defeat, and miraculously received a second chance. Now he was on the brink of life and death, But fear no longer had power over him. On the contrary, it pushed him to act even more harshly and decisively. The ice attack did no damage, but managed to distract the enemy. Sutra lost his bearings and lost sight of the player for a few moments. Jack immediately took advantage of this opportunity and rushed to the weak spot. At that moment, time seemed to be distorted, and movements became drawn out and slow. Cold used its last strength to resist the demon's destructive flame. Jack's body turned crimson, and his movements slowed noticeably. He had only seconds left before his body finally gave up. Third-degree burns were already making themselves felt, and the sword was starting to crumble right in his hands. Any other fighter would have broken down mentally, but Jack was hardened by defeat. He did not return to the past to repeat his previous path. This blow was supposed to decide everything. The legendary Ice Blade entered straight into the back of the overconfident demon's head. The fiery aura that enveloped the city dissipated in an instant. The impossible victory became reality, and Jack greedily inhaled the cold air. Those who bet on him received their confirmation. Despite the most difficult conditions, he raised his level again and opened the way to the 5th stage. A confident smile appeared on his face, although his heart was still beating at its limit after the fight. After a tough battle, Jack almost immediately lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. When he woke up, the first thing he felt was a burning pain, reminding him that the wounds were still far from completely healed. This meant only one thing. He had been unconscious for only a short time and had not had time to recover. At some points it really seemed to him that he might die, and all this time he was walking on thin ice. He had a long road ahead of him, and now he would have to be patient. The defeated demon no longer showed signs of life, meaning the reward could be collected without risk. Hidden within the body of such a creature was a rare item that only the most experienced players knew about. The heart of the giant, born in the land of fire, contained colossal energy and strength. Absorbing the crystal in its current state was too dangerous, so Jack decided to save it for the future. As soon as the reward was in his possession, Joshua appeared from the portal. He frowned and clenched his teeth, not hiding his bewilderment at what was happening. The tower's manager was getting into more and more trouble because of the genius player. The balance of the tutorial was broken, because initially the city was supposed to be completely destroyed. Other managers have already openly accused Joshua of allowing the player to evolve too quickly. Such a talented participant caused shock and created more and more tension within the system. Joshua asked Jack to be quieter, at least during the 5th tutorial. However, even despite this, the reward had to be appropriate. One handshake was enough to convey not only 10,000 points, but also a special skill. Heaven's Fate automatically enhanced the player's stats and accelerated skill growth. Only those destined to have a connection with the highest levels of the tower received such a skill. At the moment, the skill had not yet revealed its potential, but over time, it promised to become truly dangerous. Jack immediately spent some of his points on a life pill, not wanting to risk the condition of his body. After quickly checking the specs, he said goodbye to Joshua. There were no more than 4 hours left before the transition to the next stage. This time had to be used to maximum advantage in order to recover. The wounds gradually healed, the burns disappeared, and the muscles regained their tone. This is how the 5th tutorial began, which was essentially a race for survival. The surviving player was automatically transported to another space. Here he was immediately surrounded by a large number of other participants. Greenery spread out all around, and the familiar scent of the sea breeze could be felt in the air. For the first time, players from different worlds gathered in one place. The final tutorial was called The Assembled World and became the most difficult test since the disaster began. Varaganda Island was slowly sinking into the water, and to complete the stage, they had to escape. But first, the player had to destroy the boss at the top of the island. Otherwise, the mission would be considered failed. The 5th tutorial lasted a whole month, after which the island completely disappeared into the sea. Previously, all stages took only a few days, which caused players to become confused and start discussing the new rules. At first glance, a month seemed more than enough time, but this was a dangerous misconception. Everything was calculated down to the last detail, and wasting time meant bringing one's own death closer. The smartest participants immediately began to suggest joining teams. It seemed logical, given the strength of the upcoming boss. The mysterious man in the white cloak immediately refused any alliances. His smile made it clear that he didn't trust others with his safety. He looked at the others as if they didn't even deserve his attention. One of the most self-confident players couldn't stand this attitude. He rushed into the attack without even realizing who he was dealing with. One movement was enough for the insolent man and several of his allies to receive third-degree burns. Lightning pierced their bodies, clearly showing that the man in the cloak was deadly. It was Harganes, the self-proclaimed heir to Olympus and a relative of Zeus. Such a level of power at the beginning of the 5th tutorial could not go unnoticed by the tower. Jack immediately realized that he was facing a high-ranking pure-blooded force. Purebloods were born and raised within the tower, absorbing its secrets from the very beginning. That is why they always stood out from the rest of the players. In his past life, Hargan made the biggest contribution to completing the 5th tutorial. Jack didn't want to attract unnecessary attention to himself and preferred to keep his distance. The plan was going perfectly until Hargan himself noticed the guy in the red cloak. Hargan approached almost unnoticed and immediately turned his attention to Jack, as if he sensed something unusual about him. His gaze lingered on the strange equipment, as such items were unavailable at this stage of the current tutorial. Jack, without any attempt at secrecy, honestly admitted that he had purchased the equipment with points. After that, Hargan literally bombarded him with questions, trying to find out his level, skills, and everything that could reveal the player's real strength. Jack was in no hurry to answer and maintained a cold silence, which only further fueled his interlocutor's interest. Hargan soon realized he was talking to a truly rare talent and was the first to propose an alliance. He was sure that such an offer could not be rejected, but instead of receiving an answer, he was completely ignored. The main character didn't even look in his direction and simply walked away as if there was no dangerous enemy standing in front of him. Perhaps for the first time in his life, the self-confident blonde felt rejected and unnecessary. Irritation quickly gave way to excitement, and Hargan activated his speed skill, deciding to catch up with the man in the red cloak. Within moments, he burst into the depths of the forest, where dangerous monsters were hiding among the dense greenery. Instant lightning strikes tore the creatures apart, leaving them no chance. Blood covered the grass, and the blast wave broke trees, turning the forest into a field of destruction. Despite his terrifying power, Hargan clearly lacked the speed to catch up with his target. Jack had already managed to get seriously ahead and was gradually disappearing from sight. Hargan's thoughts returned again and again to the mysterious player in the red cloak. He even admitted that he had encountered a purebred that no one had heard of before. The recent boredom disappeared without a trace, and my heart began to beat faster with anticipation. Meanwhile, Jack had finally broken away from the pursuit and slowed down. He remembered Joshua's words about the balance of the 5th tutorial being broken. It seemed the manager was talking not only about him, but also about players like Hargan. Deep in the forest, Jack discovered a cave perfect for solitude. He decided to stay here and first clear the immediate perimeter. Several encounters with monsters ended in brutal and swift bloodshed. It took some effort, but soon silence reigned all around. Fate of Heaven began to progress slowly. Although the rate of growth left much to be desired, Jack didn't come here to hunt, but for a much more important purpose. His body had recovered enough to risk using the giant's heart. This crystal had to be absorbed before completing the 5th tutorial. However, doing this turned out to be much more difficult than it seemed at first glance. The moment the pure blood of the giant demon was absorbed, the body screamed in pain. The muscles were stretched to the limit. The heart began to beat at an alarming rate, and the ligaments felt like they were being turned inside out. It was as if the internal organs began to fight against an alien force, and a real battle unfolded inside the body. The heat was unbearable, and no artifacts could contain it. The fiery eyes resisted the fire of the giant race with all their might, but it was still not enough. The blood of giants is usually only smeared on oneself, and even madmen do not try to absorb it directly. The whole thing felt like suicide, and that was precisely why Jack had prepared his fiery eyes in advance. However, there was no other way, because this was the only chance to sharply increase the level. If you don't take a risk now, the whole path you've taken will lose its meaning. Jack had always been a gambler, and even in the face of death he did not change his ways. He had obtained the hidden skill of giant fire, but the absorption process was still far from complete. For the next few days he lay on the ground in pain, comparable to hell. All this time he could neither sleep, nor eat, nor even take a sip of cold water. The body reached its limit and became like a lifeless shell. Only when hope began to evaporate did the system notify that the absorption was complete. The giant's pure blood was completely absorbed, and the power was perfectly integrated. The long torment came to an end, and the body began to slowly degenerate. The pain disappeared just as suddenly, leaving behind a relief like a goddess's kiss. Waking up after recovery, Jack immediately realized that his body felt noticeably better, as if the pain he had experienced had finally begun to recede. There was no time to think, because in the past, only a few people managed to quickly pass this stage, whose names later became legends. One of these heroes was the greatest gladiator and ruler of Asgard named Odin. And this fact only pushed Jack forward even more. He had no right to lose, even though he was currently in last place in the rankings of the 5th tutorial. Upon arriving on the island, each player automatically entered the overall ranking, which grew by killing monsters and completing quests. A quick glance at the list showed how serious the competition was, as participants from different worlds were gathered here. Among them, the elves from another planet stood out. The Paladin and Elidor, brother and sister, who had already managed to earn high positions. Slightly lower down the rankings was a purebred named Julia, whose presence immediately attracted attention. Just behind her was a man from Earth named Lisandro, who was firmly at the top of the list. The undisputed first place was occupied by Hargan, who managed to create an impressive lead over the other players. The gap seemed frighteningly large, but Jack knew that with the right actions, it could still be closed. The torment he had endured was not in vain, because it was after it that he received his first full-fledged attack skill. The giant fire did not disappear even after the death of the host and continued to live inside the body, gradually revealing its power. Moreover, this skill was passed down through generations, which made it rare and truly dangerous. Activating his fiery eyes, Jack began to carefully analyze the area, assessing possible targets. Very quickly, his attention was drawn to an orc village, which looked like the perfect place for a rapid rise in ratings. Without wasting any time, he headed there alone, intending to challenge opponents that others would rather not mess with. At first, the orcs thought they were incredibly lucky, because the prey came straight to them. But when the fire engulfed the village, it dawned on each of them that this day would be their last. Screams and pleas for help echoed throughout the area, but neighboring settlements did not dare to intervene. At that moment, Jack resembled a predator unleashed, acting without hesitation or doubt. He methodically destroyed the orcs one after another, leaving no time for resistance or hope of salvation. The blood that hit his face no longer disgusted him. As if the rage mode had completely taken over his mind, the ratings were rapidly growing. But Jack understood that this was only the beginning of the real race. A few days later, he was already confidently in second place, and it was at this moment that Hargan first felt uneasy. Zeus's relative had long written this player off, but now he realized that real competition was emerging. During this time, Hargan managed to assemble a strong and well-coordinated team around himself. All the top players in the rankings, including Lisandro, were now acting together with him, not wanting to lose their advantage. Word of the new threat quickly spread among the elite, and many eagerly awaited a meeting with Jack. At the same time, each of them understood that losing a position in the rankings could cost too much. Soon, it was time to challenge one of the dungeon bosses and begin the final phase of the tutorial. The all-out hunt began, on which the completion of the test to the very end depended. The brother and sister, born on the planet Pantomime, were considered half-breeds, with the blood of both dark and light elves flowing through their veins. This mixture allowed them to find the right path even in places where ordinary players would have long since gotten lost. All that remained was to break through the protective barrier and descend into the underground cave. With an ally like Hargan, such an obstacle did not become a serious problem. The road to the boss's room was open, and the squad had no choice but to move forward. Usually the system awarded extra points for discovering a dungeon, but this time, nothing happened. This alerted the players and made them think about the possible danger. The suspicion only grew when it became clear that someone might have been here before them. As they moved underground, the system sent out an urgent notification, and tension within the squad increased. Lisandro asked the captain to check the rating, unable to shake off the uneasy feeling. What they saw stunned everyone. Jack was already in first place, despite the fact that he started the test later than the others. It was hard to believe, as if the tower itself had decided to bet on him. Meanwhile, the elite squad continued to move, acting in a coordinated manner and without hesitation. The monsters were torn apart by the team's onslaught, unable to stop their advance. The elves confidently led the group forward, relying on their heightened senses and intuition. The squad also included Julia, a purebred resident of the tower, descended from a line of combat mercenaries. The path ahead forked, and the captain decided to split his forces so as not to waste time. He ordered the two groups to move forward no matter what, because the boss needed to be killed as quickly as possible. Lisandro, having gathered his mana, proved that he was not to be underestimated, acting with coolness and precision. He fought alongside Julia, and more than once caught himself admiring her light, almost dancing technique. The monsters fell one after another, not having time to realize that they had already lost. The next cave was completely cleared, and the group came very close to the target. A huge boss door appeared in front of them, causing everyone to involuntarily hold their breath. Here it was impossible to lose concentration, because the slightest mistake could cost lives. Lisandro remained confident and was about to open the door with mana, but at that moment his heart sank painfully with anxiety. The rating changed again, and it was almost physically felt. From behind the door came a rumble and noise, as if a fight with the boss was already underway. The squad took up positions and decided not to abandon their mission. When the door was opened, they were greeted by mountains of blood and severed limbs. Almost immediately, the system notified that the dungeon had been completely cleared. This meant they were late, and Jack single-handedly doubled his rating. From the darkness, scarlet, shining eyes looked at them, and in that look, mockery was clearly visible. As the darkness cleared, that gaze became even more visible, causing the observers to involuntarily hold their breath. Oddly enough, Jack actually single-handedly destroyed the boss of this dungeon. It was not the main monster of the island, but one of the most powerful creatures hiding underground. The system automatically increased its level, along with its basic characteristics. Almost immediately, Jack felt that the giant's flame required careful handling. Otherwise, his stamina would disappear too quickly. He also noted that the skill, Heaven's Fate, only develops after killing truly strong opponents. Now there was no point in hunting the weak. His target was only the island's strongest creatures. The huge body of the underground monster lay motionless, showing no signs of life. It seemed that only an entire army could defeat such a titan, but here, one man managed it. Until this point, elite players considered Hargan to be the strongest participant in the 5th tutorial. Now, having seen the consequences of the battle, no one was in a hurry to draw such conclusions. Lisandro was the first to realize that such a player needed to be lured away, and offered Jack cooperation. The experienced fighter quickly assessed the situation, his gaze sliding over those gathered. He realized that in front of him were earthlings, elves, and only part of an elite unit. Jack's gaze lingered on Julia, whom he had not heard of in his past life. Despite the tempting offer, he refused almost immediately. He seemed to be deliberately avoiding unnecessary connections and commitments, and it looked strange because the 5th tutorial was originally created for team play. The idea here was to unite, because that was the only way to defeat the island's main boss. After the refusal, Lisandro immediately contacted the captain and summoned him to the scene of the battle. A moment later, an enraged Hargan appeared in the boss's room. He rushed forward, intending to grab the one who had displaced him from the first place in the rankings. The blonde's self-confidence played a cruel joke on him. Jack was no longer going to play the show of strength. It was time to put things in their place. In one movement, he grabbed Hargan by the head and slammed him hard into the ground. The observers turned pale, not believing their eyes. It's not every day you see Zeus's heir being humiliated like a helpless puppy. After that, Jack started talking about rankers, and a tense silence fell over the room. A ranker is a being who has passed all the tower's trials and cleared every floor. Such players receive powers that can grant them power, glory, and almost eternal life. Someday Jack will definitely become a ranker. But for him, this is just an intermediate stage. It was unpleasant for Yulia to hear this, because she and her family had always dreamed of exactly this status. She believed that only purebloods were worthy of the title of ranker. Then Jack revealed his true purpose and said that his path did not end at the top of the tower. He is going to break through its ceiling and escape the system. By this point, Hargan had come to his senses and accused Jack of being too cruel. Just recently, he wanted to see him on his team, but now he was truly furious. The blonde reminded that one day he would become the heir to Olympus. Words like that attract attention, and too much attention is always dangerous in the tower. Jack's answer was simple. He would prove that he could pass the test even without an elite team. He proposed a bet and declared that he would assemble his own dream team. If Hargan's team wins, Jack will join their ranks. But if the man in the red cloak turns out to be stronger, the conditions will be different. In this case, Hargan will be obliged to fulfill one of his requests in the future. Apparently, this was due to a special Hargan card that is only used in critical moments. Jack's past life experience allowed him to sense danger in advance and prepare for it. The deal was made without further ado, and now all that remained was to fulfill the promise. There was still a lot of time ahead, but none of the participants even thought about relaxing. Just when everyone was about to leave, time suddenly stopped, as if the world itself had decided to intervene in what was happening. Jack had his own explanation. Varaganda was not an island at all, but an ancient sacred beast whose body had long since become a haven for parasites. According to him, these creatures settled inside the giant, endlessly absorbing power and causing him excruciating pain. This is why the island periodically submerges underwater. The sea elements destroy the parasites and give the host a brief respite. Jack had just killed one of the most powerful parasites, thereby significantly alleviating the condition of the sacred beast. Hargan listened to this theory with obvious doubt, not knowing whether to believe such words or consider them fiction. Meanwhile, the time limit was no longer in effect. The system remained broken until the assistants returned it to its original state. Jack learned about all of this in his past life during a conversation with Odin, although at that time he did not understand how the legendary warrior managed to pass the test in just 1 week. Now everything became clear. Time had been stopped, and Odin had gained a huge advantage, just as Jack did now. He wasn't going to waste such a chance for a second. The steward's assistants panicked when they realized that the parasitic dragon had been killed, something that had not happened since the time of Odin. They hesitated, unsure whether to report to Joshua immediately, and tried to handle the situation themselves. This was enough for the players to win a few extra days. Using his enhanced perception, Jack instantly found his next target, a settlement of huge red orcs, promising a rapid increase in power and ranking. He immediately began hunting, cutting off the heads of monsters without hesitation and strengthening his already high position. The orcs flocked to the captain's call, desperately trying to stop the enemy. But today they were fighting not a man, but a true predator from the planet of death. It was at this moment that time finally began to move again. Having raised his rating and upgraded his skills, Jack headed to the tower where the gods live, realizing that the next stage would be much more dangerous. By that time, the elite players of the 5th tutorial had already gathered there, the most desperate and cruel of all the survivors. They all strove to destroy the boss, fully aware that this required not only skill, but also character. The fact that the heir of Zeus was nearby gave them confidence. Looking around, the elite noticed the approach of a man in a red cloak. It was obvious that Jack wasn't the only one taking advantage of the system glitch. From the fluctuations in mana, it was clear that many players had managed to strengthen themselves. Hargan chuckled and reiterated that a lone wolf would not succeed on this island. Jack never assembled a team, finally confirming his nickname, Madman. And now these two geniuses were competing for the first place. Several rank-and-file players tried to join Jack, seeing him as a chance for survival. He might not have minded, but Hargan cold-bloodedly destroyed them, making it clear that the conversations were over. This gesture was enough to make the others retreat in fear. Jack didn't care. He was ready to go alone. After taking a few steps, he jumped into the abyss without a shadow of a doubt. A couple of seconds of free fall, and Jack was already in the first boss room. Before him were dozens of mutated creatures and monsters that had passed the first stage of evolution. The rest of the players followed him, involuntarily preparing for battle. Seeing the number of enemies, some began to sweat, while others' knees began to tremble. To get to the boss, it was necessary to clear several control zones. Jack knew the route very well, and was going to get away from everyone else as quickly as possible. A giant flame and a magic sword were ready to clear the way for him. No one was in a hurry to intervene. Everyone wanted to see what the raiding leader was really capable of. The descendant of Zeus watched the events gloomily, hoping that Jack would die, and the first place would be his again. However, the battle did not go as expected, because Jack suddenly disappeared. The next moment, he appeared above the crowd of monsters, falling upon them from above. His speed and technique made others watch with their mouths open, not hiding their admiration. One blow to the orc leader was enough to make it clear that they were facing the best of the best. Sparks flew in all directions, and the oppressive aura deprived the monsters of their will and made them tremble with fear. It was a real pleasure to watch this guy, but not for the heir of Zeus, who was infuriated by what was happening. Hargan shook with rage and decided to intervene, because he simply had no right to lose the battle for the first place in the rankings. He rushed forward and began to destroy the monsters with such fury, as if his future really depended on it. Soon the entire battlefield was engulfed in bright flashes and sparks, and the scene resembled a large-scale scene from an expensive Hollywood film. The rest of the team couldn't stand by and picked up their weapons, rushing to help their captain clear the perimeter. Although they were inferior to Jack in pure strength, each had their own trump card: magical skills, increased mana concentration, or rare techniques. It was obvious that if a real battle started right now, this group would not fall so easily. After completely clearing the area, the players came across a giant gate decorated with a strange image of a battle between monsters and a huge beast. There was no doubt left. Something truly dangerous was hiding behind the door, and it took determination to take a step forward. Since everyone was here together, it made more sense to act as a team. But Jack, as usual, decided otherwise. He went first, leaving the others no choice. And in order not to give him all the rewards, Hargan and his allies hurried after him. Within moments, they found themselves in a huge hall and froze, seeing a beast chained in the very center. It was a colossal chimera, sealed deep beneath the island, and the system immediately confirmed that they were facing the third boss. At first glance, everything looked simple, but Jack immediately realized that the situation was much more complicated. He knew that destroying the control crystal would not kill the monster, but would instead subjugate it to his will. The chimera's owner receives additional points and absolute control over the monster. While the others were hoping to unite, defeat the boss, and complete the test, Jack had already made his decision. He abandoned team play, drew his sword, and pierced the magic crystal without hesitation. The chains crumbled, the curse disappeared, and at that very moment, Jack felt a monstrous power concentrated in his hands. The freed chimera roared but did not attack. It was waiting for an order. A second later, Jack ordered her to break through the nearest wall, and the giant creature obeyed. The chimera's oppressive aura paralyzed inexperienced players, causing them to turn pale and sweat as if they were in a red-hot oven. As long as Jack controlled the monster, the others did not have to fear for their lives. It was clear that the chimera had been created from parts of the creatures that inhabited the island, and this raised a disturbing question. If this is not the real boss, then who is behind all this? Jack made it clear that the real truth lay ahead and suggested they move on. The players looked at each other and then at the captain, waiting for an order. Hargan was left with no choice but to follow the man who had been irritating him for a long time. As they advanced, they found the mangled remains of the monsters, and with each step, the tension only grew. At some point, even Jack's heart started beating faster, which was extremely unusual for him. This happened when they entered the fourth boss room and saw the true creator of the chimera. The system immediately updated the task to complete the tutorial. Now the goal was clear: to destroy the creator and not give him a single chance of salvation. The chimera immediately smelled the familiar scent of blood and growled loudly, as if it recognized the person standing in front of it. Jack gained complete control over the monster, but did not betray his allies, and instead of fleeing, he entered the creator's room himself. This action interested the Black Wizard, and even a barely noticeable smile appeared on his face. He immediately felt that the blood of Zeus was present in this hall, and his attention instantly sharpened. Realizing that the person in front of him was just a half-breed, the magician allowed himself to use contemptuous words, which truly angered Hargan. The fourth boss turned out to be Child, a black mage and a ranker who had long disappeared from the tower. In the past, he was an examiner on the 50th floor and did not hesitate to use hundreds of players as test subjects. It was he who managed to mix the blood of various monsters and create a chimera. But now there was no need to fear his former strength. After his defeat, Childa lost his power and was sentenced to 1,000 years of punishment. He was forced to create bosses for tutorials, not allowing him to regain his lost power. Coming closer, Jack narrowed his eyes and allowed himself a short smile. This was enough to make the Black Wizard's face distort with rage. He recognized that look and screamed as if a demon had possessed him. The eyes, which belonged to a monkey, clearly interested the creator of the chimera. Child began to bombard Jack with questions, but he was not going to answer. The next moment, disgusting and stinking monsters rushed at the players. What everyone came here for has begun. A bloody and merciless battle. Kargan's team did not fully understand what was happening, but decided to act according to the circumstances. Raising their weapons, they rushed forward and mercilessly chopped the creatures into pieces. This could no longer be compared to battles against skeletons or goblins. The level of threat was completely different. The only consolation was that these creatures were just failed experiments. This meant that the players still had a real chance of winning. Their attacks cleared the way for Jack, and he moved forward confidently. At that moment, the skill, Coffin of Darkness, was activated against him. Child attempted to seal his opponent using black magic. It worked at first, but then the unbridled genius began to break out. Using force, Jack destroyed the protective barrier. The dark coffin had failed to stop him, and now he looked even more determined. The Black Wizard trembled, and for the first time, doubt appeared in his eyes. Looking at Jack, he saw in him the image of Hercules, the hero of Olympus, the son of Zeus, who was nicknamed the cruel killer of giants. He who never hesitated to punish evil, but was always merciful to the weak. In his past life, Hercules became Jack's friend and taught him a lot. The skill gigantization was being used in battle right now. The giant's strength seeped into his hand, although his skill level was still low. The young body could not withstand such a load for long, and Child still had a chance. During the fight, Jack seemed to be in two worlds at once. In his mind, he replayed his conversations with Hercules and recalled his warnings. The giant slayers said that the Black Wizard must be destroyed at any cost. The risk is only justified if the skill is completed. His weakened body could no longer cope, but Jack decided to go all the way. He put everything on the line and took a step closer to his goal. His mad look began to truly frighten the creator of chimeras. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Child activated the Black Wall of Thorns. It was his strongest defensive technique, but it didn't last long. A man with the strength of a giant proved to be virtually unstoppable. Jack burst through the wall and instantly grabbed Child by the neck. Pinning him against the wall, he delivered a crushing blow with his other hand, breaking his nose and knocking out his teeth. If Hercules had been watching this battle, he would have been pleased. In his past life, Jack received the most important advice from his friend Christopher, who was the first to obtain the monkey eyes and unlock their true potential. With this gaze, one can destroy the strongest monsters, and now Jack personally felt this power in battle. He finally reached the creator of the chimera, but he didn't even think about giving up and looked frighteningly calm. Child was indeed nearly indestructible, as he was said to be, and all of this was the result of thousands of years of experimentation with black magic. Over time, he transformed himself into an undead chimera, losing his humanity, but gaining a twisted vitality. However, No experiment can take everything into account, and the fiery eyes allowed Jack to notice a weak spot. After that, one precise blow was enough to make it clear that this was the end. Child had spent years tearing people's limbs apart and torturing them for his experiments, and now he himself had experienced insane pain. His death was the true retribution he deserved. After the victory, Jack involuntarily recalled the last conversation with his friends. It was they who called upon him to fight Sutra and obtain the fiery eyes. He was then supposed to absorb the giant's heart and transform into something absurdly powerful. At that time, this path seemed like madness, but now everything has come together into a single chain. The system notified me of an achievement that was hard to believe. All stats automatically increased, as the 5th level boss turned out to be truly dangerous. Even the fate of heaven had made significant progress, although Jack knew it was only the beginning. The other players also completed their tasks. Each of them was expected to receive substantial compensation for risking their own lives. But not everything turned out as smooth as it might seem at first glance. It soon became known that Julia had been seriously injured and urgently needed magical help. Hearing this, Hargan flared up with anger and could no longer restrain himself. He demanded that Jack come out and have a serious talk. Formally, to complete the 5th stage, it was enough to destroy the Chimera. But the constant pursuit of progress has left other players on the brink of death. Julia almost died, and Hargan believed that it was Jack's fault. However, the captain understood that part of the blame lay with him. No one forced them to follow Jack. Everyone made this choice consciously. Jack himself knew he was going too far, but otherwise, he would not be able to meet the outer gods of the tower. These creatures inhabit a different space, where even weightlessness feels like pressure. Rankers have died in the past, just to try and resist even one of them. Jack must become stronger to avoid repeating his past fate. He wants to cut out the rotten parts of the world and give hope to humanity. For this purpose, he is ready to go to the end, even if the sacrifices of other people do not concern him. Such responsibility cannot be shared with anyone else. This is why he refuses alliances and continues to act alone. In the midst of the conversation, the tutorial director Joshua appeared. Upon seeing the representative of Olympus, he initially flared up with anger, remembering the recent conflict with this guild. But rage quickly turned to despair when Joshua realized that Child had been destroyed. This wizard was supposed to supply monsters for another 1,000 years, and now we'll have to find a replacement. Despite all the problems, Jack still deserved the award. This time, he obtained the Black God's Stone, known as Hades' Helmet Fragment. Hades, one of the 3 main gods of Olympus, owned a helmet that was considered one of the most powerful artifacts. In his past life, Jack dreamed of getting it, but he didn't think it would happen so early. The conditions were met, and the players began to move on to the next stage of the tower. Already during the transition, the system gave Jack another unexpected prize, a mysterious egg. He didn't have time to deal with the consequences. There were much more important and dangerous matters at hand right now. Finally, the players who passed all the tests found themselves in the trial tower and took the first step into a new reality. They were on the ground floor and had to prepare for the real challenge over the next few weeks. This region was called the Step of the Beginning. It was here that the first acquaintance between future rivals and allies took place. More experienced guild representatives were already waiting for newcomers to begin recruiting and replenishing their ranks. The Olympians were immediately noticeable, thanks to their uniforms and confident demeanor. It was easy to guess that Jack had no intention of joining any guild. He wanted to continue his solitary path and stay away from any obligations and hierarchies. Lately, Hargan has been having more and more doubts. He felt that Olympus was not acting as honestly as it tried to show and was deliberately hiding a lot. Jack only hinted that these suspicions were not unfounded, but did not reveal the whole picture. He advised me to be careful and left without even saying goodbye. Finally, Jack warned them to beware of the jackals, who would soon strike first. As soon as Jack left the Step of Novices, Agamemnon appeared next to Hargan. This captain was one of the representatives of Olympus and was in charge of the guild's military detachment. He came to personally congratulate the young gentleman on completing the tutorial. Their relationship since childhood left much to be desired, and was rarely without tension. The captain often allowed himself to be disrespectful, which constantly provoked conflicts. Hargan had to restrain himself to avoid incurring the wrath of Zeus. After a brief flash of irritation, Agamemnon inquired about the identity of the man in the red cloak. Hargan thought for a moment and replied that it was his friend. The conversation quickly turned to jackals, which every newcomer should know about. This is what they called people who refused to go up to the next floor. They hunted in the steppe and attacked newcomers, taking their equipment and money. Their favorite prey were loners without guilds or serious skills. The preparatory period before the first stage of the tower was called the mealtime. It was at this moment that the jackals went out to hunt. Meanwhile, Jack walked through the green forest, fingering the black god's stone in his hand. He knew he would need a master to purify it in the future. But even now the artifact was dangerously useful. The Hades stone made its owner almost invisible, which was especially useful when encountering jackals. They did indeed appear quickly, unerringly tracking down lone targets. Seeing the newcomer's strange clothing, the jackals hesitated for a second, but the thirst for profit prevailed. Instead of analyzing the situation, they decided to attack without warning. It was almost amusing to watch their plans fall apart when the hunted turned into the hunter. Inconspicuous Jack acted preemptively, and one after another the heads fell to the ground. The green forest, full of life and flowers, quickly turned scarlet. None of the jackals understood where death came from. The guy in red looked like a ghost. Jack could have killed everyone, but he decided to leave one to talk. He didn't waste time and immediately asked the question that interested him. The genius in the red cloak wanted to know where the man nicknamed Cloudless was. The jackal was genuinely surprised to hear this name from the newcomer. Jack was truly lucky. He had just started his journey and already hit the jackpot. By evening, he reached the nearest town and allowed himself a break. The calm atmosphere, simple dinner, and absence of extra people made the evening unexpectedly comfortable. Jack sat on the veranda, looking into the distance and involuntarily returning in his thoughts to the past. He once spent such evenings with his friends. Now they were missed especially strongly, and the feeling of loneliness was becoming stronger and stronger. As his eyes filled with moisture, Jack forced himself to pull himself together and return to reality. He knew he had to stay strong, or he wouldn't be able to fulfill his destiny. The next step will be working with the Hades stone, an artifact that can take him to a completely different level. If this stone is purified, the concealment skill will reach the heavenly rank, meaning Jack will gain an advantage that most players can't even dream of. Each great god had his own power stone. Zeus used a lightning shard, while his brother relied on black magic. Thanks to the memories of his past life, Jack knew exactly where to go and had no doubt about his choice. In this city lived that very blacksmith, whose name was still considered an indicator of the upper class. It wasn't hard to find, but getting there without any problems turned out to be much more difficult. Along the way, too many suspicious types noticed the newcomer in unusual equipment. His uniform immediately attracted the attention of local bandits, and conflict became only a matter of time. One of them even pulled out a sword and almost pierced Jack's rib. But the red cloak withstood the blow. After that, retribution began, and the number of enemies ceased to matter. Skills decided the outcome of the fight, and twisted arms and broken ribs quickly discouraged the attackers from continuing. Having finished, Jack calmly looked around and entered the forge. There wasn't a single extra visitor inside, as if this place had been long forgotten. The newcomers simply didn't understand how professional the local master was. A huge back, pumped up arms, and long hair immediately revealed the presence of an experienced blacksmith. It was enough to pick up one of his weapons to understand that you were dealing with a true professional. Even a sword made of cheap materials had perfect balance, and only Uncle Vicario was capable of such a thing. Hearing his name, the blacksmith became wary, but Jack immediately asked him to relax. He showed that he was just a regular newcomer on the first floor and did not pose a threat. Then from the pocket appeared that very stone, capable of surprising even the gods. Vicario couldn't believe his eyes. The newcomer really did bring Hades' stone. Jack didn't explain how he got it, limiting himself to a simple luck. Any blacksmith would dream of working with such a material, and Vicario was no exception. He agreed to clear the stone of excess darkness without asking questions. At the same time, the blacksmith did not understand why the player decided to trust him, because there were plenty of craftsmen. Jack's answer was simple. He wanted to work with someone he really trusted. These words struck a chord with Vicario, reminding him of the times when his name thundered throughout the tower. He agreed to take on the job, but set a condition. No one should know about this collaboration. Jack accepted this demand without hesitation. After the negotiations, a rare sense of calm emerged, and it was possible to allow oneself a break. A few points were spent on a simple but filling breakfast, since there was still time before the first test. Cleaning the stone will take at least 10 days, and a lot can change during this time. Jack even allowed himself a brief ironic thought about a quiet breakfast with a beautiful blonde. But instead, Hargan appeared nearby and easily found him through his connections. He came to find out how Jack was going to climb further into the tower. The answer was short. The path of the loner remains unchanged. However, Jack suggested that they take some time off and at the same time eradicate a pack of jackals. This did not require a large team. 2 trained fighters were enough. They agreed to begin the cleanup the following evening and agreed to meet at the forge. After saying goodbye, Hargan left, and Jack almost immediately felt someone else's gaze. The man in the dark cloak had been watching him all this time, waiting for the right moment. Unexpectedly, the stranger turned out to be Captain Agamemnon from the Olympus faction. It was their first meeting, and the captain expressed respect for the newcomer's skills. His goal was clear. He had come to negotiate a partnership with a man who had already begun to be called a genius. Jack was one of the few players who managed to attract the attention of the gods with his performance in the tutorial. At the same time, the captain deliberately did not interfere in the conversation between Jack and Hargan, not wanting the blonde to find out anything unnecessary. There had been tension within the Olympus faction for a long time, and lately everyone was thinking only about themselves. Alliances with newcomers were considered useless, so the captain immediately offered a more profitable solution. The faction was ready to provide Jack with resources, protection, and a quick ascent up the tower. Everything looked beautiful. All that was needed was to form an alliance with Mr. Eris. He is the legitimate son of Hera and Zeus, a great being who has already become a ranker. But despite the big names and generous promises, Jack remained indifferent. He had always intended to go it alone and had no intention of changing that path. Olympus had long been rotten from the inside, and it was no secret to him. The guy in the red cloak got up from the table without even saying goodbye, once again showing his arrogance. This behavior enraged the captain. His face turned red with rage. Jack only coldly added that he would never cooperate with unworthy people. When he went out into the street, he didn't even suspect that by doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. The captain immediately called his assistant and ordered him to gather a pack of jackals. At the first opportunity, they were to attack and destroy the player named Jack. The jackals were puzzled as to why they were raising 100 fighters for the sake of one newcomer. Agamemnon warned that this guy was dangerous and should not be underestimated. The next day, a meeting between the 2 talented players took place. All evening, Hargan watched Jack silently, trying to piece together too many questions. He remembered the words of the Black Wizard and did not understand where Jack got his monkey eyes from. Previously, this skill belonged only to Christopher, a sage equal to the heavens. In less than 100 years, he rose through the tower and became a high ranker. Christopher became famous as a warrior with ideal innate qualities. But Jack didn't just use his eyes. He also controlled fire at the level of Apollo. Moreover, he used the techniques of giants, which were previously known only to Hercules. Hargan couldn't help but wonder who this man really was. The answers may have existed, but it was impossible to get them in one evening. It was better to return to reality and deal with the problem of jackals in the city. Jack brought Hargan to an ordinary, unremarkable tavern. Inside, they were met by a young man who said he was too busy for guests. But as soon as Jack said the name Cloudless, his hands began to tremble. He dropped the pen and rushed towards the exit, as if he were fleeing. Jack instantly accelerated and easily caught up with the fugitive. Now there was no doubt left. In front of them was the very same Cloudless one about whom there had been rumors. His appearance turned out to be just an illusion. His true form quickly manifested itself, and the boy seemed to have aged by decades. Before them stood the king of the jackals, a player from Murim named Michael. He no longer looked like the harmless, handsome man from the cover of a magazine. Michael frantically tried to figure out where the information had leaked from, but Jack only smiled calmly. Behind the jackal king stood influential people from the Olympus faction. Jack started the conversation, while Hargan was increasingly losing his understanding of what was happening. It seemed that behind his back in Olympus, things were happening that he didn't even know about. The Jackal King had long collaborated with Agamemnon, carrying out his dirty orders. If the heavenly ruler finds out about this, the consequences will be catastrophic. Judging by the expression on Michael's face, he understood this perfectly well. The Jackal King was willing to do anything to keep his secrets hidden. First, Jack needed to find out where exactly all these criminals were hiding and who was really running their organization. The Jackal's structure numbered over 1,000 fighters, and Bezoblackny had to admit that gathering them all in one place was the only way out. He had no choice but to agree to meet in an underground cave known as the Midnight Breakfast. After this, the two young players calmly left the tavern without attracting any unnecessary attention. Hargan was no longer smiling. His face had become hard and his eyes showed anger, which he was barely containing. When they were alone, a dark aura flared around the blonde, and he demanded an explanation from Jack. He still found it difficult to believe that Olympus was capable of cooperating with criminal structures. Hargan grew up within this faction, and from childhood considered it a symbol of justice and order. Now he had a choice: accept reality or continue living in illusions. Too many things had been going wrong lately: Jack's words, Joshua's hints, and the Cloudless One's behavior. All this gradually came together to form one picture, and it was far from ideal. Jack didn't press the issue and simply suggested that Hargan decide for himself whose side he was on. The next day, it was time to deal with the jackals, and the guy in the red cloak was already waiting for his partner. He admitted that Hargan might not come, but he was wrong. The heir of Zeus thought everything over and realized that he had no right to turn a blind eye to what was happening. If Olympus has truly begun to rot from the inside, then it needs to be stopped. He remembered the words of his mother, whom he hardly knew, but who always said that justice is more important than strength. Hargan wanted her to be proud of him, so he stood next to Jack. Whoever the jackal's patrons were, he promised to destroy anyone who tarnished the name of Olympus. Meanwhile, a whole army of criminals had gathered in the underground cave, tensely talking among themselves. The smell of oil was clearly present in the air, but no one was in a hurry to explain why they had been gathered there. Soon the king of the jackals, Michael, came onto the stage, appearing in person before his subordinates for the first time. Previously, he had always hidden in the shadows, ruling through assistance, and this only strengthened his authority. Thousands of bandits bowed their heads, acknowledging the authority of their leader. Michael announced that he had gathered everyone for an important announcement that could change the future of the organization. He declared that from now on, the jackals would receive even greater support thanks to the patronage of Olympus. After this, the king decided to introduce two patrons who would oversee their affairs. Two people appeared on the scene, well-disguised Jack and Hargan. Michael still didn't understand what was happening, sincerely believing that his empire was not in danger. The points collected from the bandits intended for Agamemnon were given to Jack. It turned out to be Asgardian currency, and in an amount that made it difficult to hide one's surprise. Having assessed the loot, Jack only grinned, feeling that he had hit the jackpot. He thanked the Cloudless One for his cooperation and calmly declared that the performance was over. Then there was a snap of fingers, and the cave was instantly engulfed in flames. The entire space was pre-soaked in oil. All that was left was to light the wick. The criminals, who had been robbing and killing ordinary people for years, screamed as they were engulfed in flames. They begged for mercy and a second chance, but the fire knew no mercy. It was not an execution. It was retribution. Michael watched in horror as it happened, realizing that he had signed his own death warrant. He couldn't believe that two players were capable of destroying 1,000 of his fighters. Hargan acted with cold blood, as if he were tearing the rot from Olympus's body with his own hands. The Jackal King desperately tried to contact the captain, but there was no answer. Jack blocked all communication channels in advance, cutting off the cave from the outside world. The concentration of mana isolated the space. There was nowhere to expect help from. Michael realized that he would die here along with his empire. After years of plunder and bloodshed, it's time to pay the price. With a bestial roar, he rushed forward, baring his rotten teeth. Jack remained calm, simply waiting for the moment when the victim would impale himself on his sword. Jack's aura washed over the Jackal King like a heavy wave, and he froze, as if his body refused to obey his mind's commands. From then on, everything was decided by technique. A few precise movements, cold calculation, and not a single unnecessary emotion. A moment later, Michael's head rolled across the stone floor, and the world became a little quieter and fairer. When the underground cave was finally empty, the two walked outside, breathing in the fresh air as if returning to reality. Hargan was deeply affected by what had happened and found it difficult to comprehend how calmly his partner had accepted it. Jack had just killed over 1,000 people, and from the outside, it looked like he was just doing a routine job. Hargan's mind. Did this man really feel no guilt at all? And was he not afraid of becoming a monster? Jack didn't make any excuses. He just calmly said that he had rid the world of those who had been ruining other people's lives for years. For him, it was not a sin or cruelty, but a necessity for which someone still had to take responsibility. Hargan began to think that perhaps this is how people who are ready to change the world, and not just live in it, think. At that moment, he stopped seeing Jack as a rival and began to perceive him as a reference point. The heir of Zeus promised himself that he would not stop until he had torn the rot out of Olympus to its very roots. After that, it was time to deal with the reward and the consequences of what happened. Dirty money in itself meant nothing, but now it could be turned into a tool for right deeds. At first, Hargan didn't dare even touch these points, as if they might burn him. However, after learning their true value, he realized that sometimes even darkness can be turned to good. Finally, Jack asked a question that had been bothering him for a long time. He wanted to know what reward Hargan received for the last tutorial, taking second place. The answer confirmed the guess. The prize was indeed valuable and rare. At this point, the story of the two heroes temporarily takes a back seat, and attention shifts to the captain of Olympus. Agamemnon was beside himself, unable to understand why the Cloudless One had not yet contacted him. The situation looked suspicious, especially considering that the jackals were required to pay a tax for protection. Soon one of the assistants burst into the tavern and urgently called the captain to come with him. Within minutes, they were standing in an underground cave, trying to comprehend the scale of what had happened. 1,000 bodies burned alive is a sight for which no one can be prepared. Finding no points or traces of the deal, Agamemnon lost his temper, realizing that he had been outplayed. Meanwhile, Jack received almost 250,000 points for the completed task. It was impossible to spend such a sum immediately. Too many eyes were watching the currency's movements. The best solution was to lie low and wait for the right moment, as any experienced player would do. But Jack's thoughts were occupied by another mystery. He could not understand what the strange egg he had received as a reward was. Hargan received the Hand of Thunder, an artifact that even rankers are willing to fight for. This means that the egg must be an item of an even higher level. Typically, only 2 types of creatures were born from such relics, either those who become the protectors of peace or those who are capable of destroying it. In any case, the creature inside the egg will have to acknowledge Jack as its master. Suddenly, the room was filled with a crackling sound, and the air became dark and heavy. The egg responded to its owner's presence, showing its will for the first time. These days have given me too much to think about, and I don't want to remain inactive any longer. To save time, Jack went to the blacksmith. Vicario worked without rest and was ready to show results. The Hades stone turned out to be incredibly durable, and the master had to put in all his effort to process it. During the purification process, a large amount of valuable magical dust was generated. This material could be used to strengthen armor or weapons. The blacksmith suggested creating an item that would work in conjunction with the stone. For Jack, it was a chance to take his gear to the next level. The magical dust was planned to be combined with mithril, the strongest metal in the universe. The price of such work was high, and now he could not afford such expenses. Jack was about to refuse, but the master unexpectedly offered to settle the debt. This offer could change everything, and the guy in the red cloak did not refuse. Vicario didn't help out of pity. Jack entrusted him with the relic, and the blacksmith decided to repay in kind. He offered a loan and promised to create a sword capable of fighting even ancient dragons. A week passed, and tension was growing in the Olympus Guild, as the captain saw an opportunity. The destruction of the jackals could be passed off as a victory if unnecessary witnesses were removed. The only obstacle remaining was Jack, and so they decided to eliminate him as quickly as possible. An army of soldiers was ordered to begin the hunt, without asking questions or showing any doubts. At this time, Jack himself was exterminating monsters, maintaining his shape and slowly increasing his stats. Progress was slow but steady, and so he felt no need to rush. At this point, Vicario announced that the cleansing of the Hades stone was complete, and the result exceeded expectations. The relic lost its darkness and became a truly pure artifact, worthy even of the gods. The blacksmith was waiting for Jack, but he heard a noise and went outside, clutching his hammer tightly in his hands. There he was, already surrounded by the army of Olympus, led by a captain who did not hide his hostile intentions. The captain coldly called the blacksmith by his real name, Hephaestus, and without hesitation accused him of betraying Olympus. He once refused to carry out the gods' dirty orders, and the faction still hasn't forgiven him for that choice. The ranker's strength was limited, but even under these conditions, Hephaestus remained deadly. That's why Olympus brought Harris, a top ranker and one of the faction's strongest fighters. Harris immediately recognized the blacksmith, having studied under him in his youth and considered him a living legend. Now the students stood opposite the master, realizing that this fight would change their destinies forever. The battle began immediately, and the ordinary soldiers were ordered to retreat as far as possible. The blows shook the street, and the shock waves broke walls and crippled those who did not have time to retreat. The first clashes led to nothing, and Hephaestus remained calm, in complete control of the fight. He didn't want to kill Harris, and held back until the very end, trying to finish the fight without death. But the young ranker suddenly changed tactics and began to act harshly and calculatingly. Using artifacts, he distracted the master and dealt a sneaky blow at his most vulnerable moment. When the dust settled, it became clear that the outcome of the battle could no longer be changed. Hephaestus's body began to turn to stone, as if under the gaze of Medusa Gorgon herself. All of this was made possible by the shield seal, which was capable of suppressing even a legendary ranker. A moment later, Hephaestus completely turned into a motionless stone statue. Harris had won one of the most important victories of his life, but there was no joy on his face. The captain ordered that the main criminal be immediately captured and taken to Olympus. He was confident that everything was under control and the danger had finally been eliminated. But the next moment, a man in a red cloak appeared out of nowhere. With one precise move, Jack cut off the leg of the nearest soldier without even slowing down. Seeing the petrified blacksmith, he no longer held back his rage. His aura changed, and the air around him became heavy, as if space itself was pressing down on people. Each of the soldiers realized that they had made a mistake for which they would have to pay with their lives. For the army of Olympus, this moment became the beginning of a real nightmare. Everyone understood that petrification only worked once a day, and no one knew how long the effect would last. Once the effect wears off, Hephaestus will be able to move, and then the situation will instantly spiral out of control. All this time, the captain was sure that the great blacksmith was behind the destruction of the jackals. He believed that Hephaestus had taken the money for himself, taking advantage of the chaos and weakness of the system. Therefore, the appearance of an ordinary newcomer in front of him was a real shock for the captain. In order not to leave any unnecessary witnesses, he gave the order to act with the utmost cruelty. The soldiers hesitated, reminding them that killing new recruits was punishable by severe fines. Then the captain killed one of them in cold blood, making it clear that this was not up for discussion. After this, the real battle began, and there was no longer any way to retreat. The fiery eyes instantly calculated the trajectories, paving Jack's way through the enemies. The soldiers were well trained, but even that was not enough against the talented player. His sword cut through them like a knife through butter, turning the fight into a one-sided massacre. When the blade wasn't enough, Jack didn't hesitate to supplement his attacks with bolts of pure mana. He confidently combined skills, demonstrating the difference between experience and sheer numbers. It became clear that this guy couldn't be overcome by sheer numbers, and that a completely different level of strength was needed. The captain became nervous and beads of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He didn't understand where an ordinary newbie got such skills and such composure. At that moment, he decided to call upon someone who was truly capable of challenging him. Among the army of Olympus there was such a man, a merciless ranker named Harris. Before engaging in battle, Harris asked why Jack had stood up for Hephaestus. He calmly replied that he was a client of the blacksmith and was now suffering because of the faction games. Ranker stood before him. He activated the giant's skill, strengthening his body and hoping to finish the fight without unnecessary bloodshed. The clash between the two warriors promised to be extremely tough and tense. They came together like two meteorites, colliding in the void of a boundless universe. Harris used the Sun Shard, dramatically increasing his stats. The flash seared Jack's body, and the pain made him grit his teeth for the first time. At last he met an opponent who could not be broken head-on. To win, you have to go beyond your own limits. The Sun Shard was a gift from Apollo, a teacher who spoke much about the price of power. After the first exchange of blows, Harris himself was also injured, but this did not faze him. He kept a cool head and tried to end the fight as quickly as possible. The next blow was unblockable, and Jack's back smashed through the nearest wall. The fight with the elite ranker exposed all his weaknesses. He has a hard time against enemies who close quickly and are not afraid of a counterattack. Anyone else in his place would have given up by now, but not Jack. Once in the workshop, he noticed that work on the Hades stone was completed. This meant that he could use the relic's power right now. Harris, seriously wounded, recalled a conversation with his teacher Apollo. He warned that on the first floor, restrictions hide the true power of skills. If the restrictions are violated, the system immediately finds the player, reminding them that the tower is a living and vengeful organism. The captain coldly congratulated Harris on the successful attack, although he saw that even for the ranker, it had come at a high price. In their eyes, it was all over. The main criminal had been eliminated, and the brazen loner was about to become the next victim. All that remained was to collect the body and close the case without attracting unnecessary attention from the system. The plan collapsed the moment the workshop burst into cold blue light, breaking the silence of the night. A man thought dead emerged from the flames, raised by the purified stone of Hades. The wounds were healing right before our eyes, and the soldier's confidence began to rapidly turn into fear. Even Harris took a step back, realizing for the first time that this wasn't prey but a real threat. The attribute of darkness left no doubt. Such powers are not acquired by chance or controlled by ordinary people. Noticing the ranker's hesitation, the captain decided to act harshly and take control of the situation. He ordered the soldiers to go forward and finish off the target at any cost, regardless of losses. The attack fizzled out immediately. An unknown force tore people apart as if they were just shadows. The survivors retreated, allowing Jack to reach the petrified master, unable to approach again. The petrification effect still lingered, but Jack now knew how to turn it to his advantage. Agamemnon, losing his composure, again ordered the attack, signing the death warrant for his subordinates. The soldiers rushed forward, not even realizing that they were facing a force that extended beyond the floor. Hades is the god of death, and his artifacts do not spare the living, drawing out the very essence of existence. The dark energy of the stone devoured souls, turning people into empty shells, devoid of will. Now it has become clear to everyone that this enemy cannot be stopped by conventional methods. The only one who could still challenge was Harris, despite his fatigue and injuries. He caught his breath, gathered his mana, and began to calculate the decisive blow. The second round between the elite fighters promised to be much tougher and more dangerous than the first. Jack received a boost after his defeat, but whether it would be enough against the sun fragment is an open question. The answer had to come right now, because the collision had become inevitable. The two fighters froze, looking into each other's eyes like predators before their final battle. The ground beneath their feet shook, as if the world could not bear their presence. The air became extremely hot, turning the battlefield into something like a scorched desert. Ordinary people retreated quickly, realizing that this was no place for them. Harris attacked first, confident that he could break his opponent again. His strikes were wide and merciless, each one looking for a weak spot in Jack's defense. A clot of solar mana rushed forward, trying to melt the darkness and the enemy's defense. The explosion demolished nearby buildings, turning the street into ruins in an instant. Even the captain, hidden behind the wall, felt a cold sweat run down his back. After the exchange of blows, the world resembled the epicenter of a catastrophe, where nothing living remained. Both fighters collapsed to the ground, showing no signs of life. Agamemnon rushed forward, wanting to finish off the enemy, but suddenly received a blow right to the heart. Turning around, he saw that Hephaestus had freed himself from his petrification and had risen to his feet. The great blacksmith rose, and in his gaze there was only cold fury. He raised his hammer and swung it, intending to crush the captain with one blow. Agamemnon's strength was leaving him, and fear was paralyzing the soldiers, depriving them of the will to resist. At the moment when everything was decided, a portal opened in front of the captain, from which emerged a giant whose size would have frightened even the legendary Hulk. It was Joshua, the steward, who stepped in to stop the chaos from getting out of control. The manager was no longer going to turn a blind eye to the huge faction wreaking havoc on the first floor. It wasn't the master himself that irritated him, but Olympus's brazen interference in the affairs of the lower floors. The captain immediately realized that all his dirty games were over before they had even begun. Now all he had to do was return home and convey to Zeus a warning about the serious consequences. It was clear from Joshua's behavior that he was not at all afraid of the head of Olympus. He acted as if he was ready to rip Zeus's beard out at any moment without the slightest hesitation. Hephaestus allowed himself a rare smile, enjoying the moment of long-awaited victory. Today he has survived death, emerged from the stone captivity, and once again strengthened his legacy. Meanwhile, the two top-class fighters were inexorably approaching each other, moving towards each other. Suddenly, the egg developed teeth, and the space around it shrank from the predatory threat. The creature inside was clearly choosing the moment, to kill its weakened owner or to intervene and help. A moment later, the egg fell silent again, falling asleep along with Jack. When Jack woke up, the first thing he saw in front of him was a huge bearded man. He habitually called him uncle, although Hephaestus clearly did not like this address. However, being an uncle is still better than being an aunt. So the blacksmith remained silent. Jack lay unconscious for a whole day, and his body gave in immediately after the stress he had experienced. The master, without further ado, admitted that he was not Vicario, but a blacksmith of Olympus named Hephaestus. Jack accepted the revelation calmly, without showing an ounce of surprise. Hephaestus realized that his true identity had been revealed long ago. He once suspected the guy of having connections with Olympus, but now those doubts have disappeared. The level and skills clearly showed that this was no ordinary player. Jack's mystery remained unsolved, but somehow trust arose naturally. The old workshop was destroyed, and now the blacksmith worked in rented premises. Hephaestus promised to finish the job and create the sword Jack had been waiting for so long. A feeling of old mutual understanding arose between them again. They were once almost best friends, and that feeling suddenly returned. After waking up, Jack lived for several days as if through a thick fog. He continued to kill monsters, but his body still refused to work at its limit. Thoughts of a fight with Olympus did not leave him, but the time for this had not yet come. Before the key battles of the tower could begin, the body had to be strengthened. A purified fragment of darkness, without any unnecessary impurities, should have helped with this. It enhanced basic stats and allowed for the use of opening techniques. Among the new abilities, the summoning of hell stood out, a power wielded by Hades himself. The skill's effect remained unknown, but its name alone sounded ominous. After finishing his training, Jack headed to the new workshop. Today he was supposed to receive a sword made of mithril and dark sky dust. In addition, the master prepared a gift that did not immediately catch everyone's eye. At first, Jack thought it was a joke until he noticed the invisible gloves. How they were created remained a mystery, but it looked impressive. The gloves allowed one to always keep the dark stone with oneself and use it at a critical moment. Finally, it was time for the main gift, a sword capable of cutting through the flesh of dragons. As soon as he took it into his hands, the balance and aura of the weapon immediately distinguished the owner. The name was found instantly. Jack, without a doubt, called the blade the Sword of the Dark Knight. Hephaestus grimaced, finding the name too banal, but he didn't interfere, letting the guy decide for himself. Jack looked genuinely pleased, enjoying his new gear. The thought of fighting the strongest opponents now warmed him even more. Before parting, the blacksmith asked what steps Jack was planning next. Jack calmly stated that he was going to throw Olympus off the top of the tower and sink it to the very bottom. These words clearly pleased Hephaestus, although he reacted with his usual calm. Hephaestus looked at Jack with rare approval. Before him stood a man without fear or hesitation, and this commanded respect. The farewell was dry and short, without unnecessary words or unnecessary emotions. They broke up the same way in their past lives. Tough men simply don't know any other way. Their connection was born long ago and has been through blood, loss, and devotion. At the most difficult moment, Hephaestus gave up his last materials to forge a special sword for Jack. This act forever cemented the trust between them, and Jack remembered it even in the new reality. Their paths temporarily diverged, but both knew that this meeting would not be their last. Having finished all his business, Jack headed to the Colosseum, where the main test of the first floor was taking place. At the entrance, a guard, an elf named Shuri, was already waiting for him. The guy immediately caught her attention because he became the best player in the tutorial. The statistics confirmed the obvious. She was facing a new generation of talent. However, Shuri believed that the Colosseum would break even such self-confident newcomers. Rankers fell here, and talent alone wasn't enough. While the warden was doubting, Jack calmly prepared for the test. In the Colosseum, it was not cunning that decided the battle, but pure strength and fighting skill. Christopher, Hercules, and Odin led the rankings, setting an unattainable bar. Hargan held on to 12th place, which looked respectable after the Thunder Hand. Jack stepped forward, choosing a target higher and more difficult than the others. The test began with a series of fights, where one enemy replaced another without pause. The first orc fell in a matter of seconds, without even having time to get close. With one blow, Jack cut his face open and immediately made his presence known to the entire arena. Without a moment's hesitation, he challenged his next opponent. Shuri watched as victories followed one after another, and her calm began to crack. The skeleton squads crumbled under the blows, not having time to engage in combat. Jack moved without fuss, destroying enemies simply and without unnecessary movements. The Colosseum showed the obvious. Skill matters more than big titles. Once he had warmed up, he began to use heavy skills without hiding his true strength. The giant's strength and the devil's flame were used, raising the arena to dust. The next opponent was a high-level knight with an impeccable reputation. It was only his second defeat in his long career. Before he fell, the knight admitted that this was the first time he had seen someone rise after his best blows. Jack let him die without humiliation, confirming his own code. This victory allowed the guy in the red cloak to catch up with Heavenly Christopher. There was a 20th round left, a milestone that no one had ever passed. Jack accepted the challenge without hesitation, stepping forward to meet the legend. The system announced the final test, and the air above the arena darkened. An oppressive aura filled the Colosseum, causing the spectators to hold their breath. The cage swung open, releasing the one who had been waiting for blood for a long time. The creature languishing in the darkness burst out and immediately rushed to attack. The huge monster carried within itself pure rage that knew no mercy. It was only by a miracle that the player held off the first attack, and even this block cost him almost all of his concentration. Jack was thrown back, and it became clear that today he would face not a dash, but a long battle of attrition. The Colosseum came back to me, too vivid, as if it had happened yesterday. Then the Sky Ranker was knocked unconscious by a tail strike and almost died right there in the arena. The huge snake became a personal nightmare for him, which he remembered until the end of his life. Now Jack was under that same gaze, and the threat was 1-to-1, without discounts or concessions. The Outer God's fragment looked at him as if it had already chosen its prey and was simply waiting for a mistake. This snake was once broken only by the legendary Ranker Susano. And that at the cost of a terrible fight. After that, not a single great ranker could even injure the monster, no matter how hard they tried. The system ordered to get rid of the snake's head. It sounded simple, but in reality, it was almost impossible. Fangs flashed sharper than swords, and eyes seemed to see the opponent's weaknesses before he moved. Jack chose retreat not as a flight, but as a calculation, to wait out the rhythm and study the enemy's habits. From the first seconds, sweat poured down my face, and my muscles felt like lead, as if the fight had already lasted an hour. Previously, his main asset was endurance, and he maintained it as stubbornly as his blade. This is what allowed him to fly through the Colosseum, sweep away his rivals, and catch up with the leader of the ratings. Now endurance was still crucial, but the body was already exhausted by the previous series of fights. A few minutes of stubborn defense, and Jack rushed into the offensive, trying to turn the tide of the fight. But the attacks were drowned out by the scales, as if he were hitting armor that did not recognize threats and did not crack. The tower does not offer impassable trials. Such is the law of this world, cold and iron. This means there is a chance even now. You just need to see it before the snake closes its jaws. Shuri still watched the battle, not blinking or moving, as if she was afraid to miss the moment of the end. Jack had surprised her more than once, but now she had almost no doubt. This was the limit. It was impossible to stand against such a dragon for long, and defeat seemed only a matter of time. She didn't know the main thing. All this time, Jack wasn't being a hero, but was looking for a weak spot on the monster's body. When the target was found, he did not freeze in delight, but gathered himself as if before jumping into the abyss. The fiery eyes fixed their focus on the spot, and all that was left was to make one precise dash without the right to a second. The snake, fixated on pressure and attacks, momentarily forgot about its own vulnerability. Next to the heart, there was a single scaleless spot, a small but saving window. This was his only weak spot, which most people didn't even know about. Taking advantage of his flexibility, Jack broke off the trajectory, dodged the blow, and flew into the open area. The snake didn't have time to react and was left open just enough for one mistake to become a death sentence. As the sword entered the skin near the heart, the monster let out a death roar, tearing the air. The scream was so deafening that an ordinary person would have gone mad if he heard it up close. Now Shuri had no doubts anymore. A new legend of the Colosseum had just been born before her eyes. The evil serpent with magic, capable of wrapping its body around 8 mountain peaks, fell defeated. Once upon a time, only Susanoo was able to put this catastrophe to sleep by sealing the monster with his legendary sword. He left a wound on his body, and it was this wound that eventually became the weak spot that saved Jack. The myth came to life again, and history repeated itself. As if the tower liked to repay old debts, the level rose automatically, and the progress of the Heaven's Doom skill jumped sharply following the victory. The attributes were enhanced, and the achievement was recorded in the Colosseum records as fact, not rumor. Of course, Jack took first place, beating the legendary rankers and their previous records. The warden of the Colosseum came out to him personally to look the winner in the eyes without a distance. Quick and silent movements that hid her presence always gave away the elf named Shuri. She tried to figure out whether he knew about the snake's weak spot in advance, or whether it was pure instinct. The tower doesn't offer impossible challenges, meaning there's always a thread leading to victory somewhere. All Jack could do was look around more carefully than the others and keep his cool. His intuition did not fail him, and it was precisely this that led him to the point where one blow decides his fate. But Shuri still looked at him warily. There were too many coincidences in favor of the newcomer. He had too many elite skills, and it didn't fit with a normal start. She promised not to disclose what had happened, and to keep his strengths and weaknesses a secret. After completing the challenge, the Colosseum officially acknowledged Jack's victory and proceeded to award the reward for the completed stage. Instead of a full-fledged weapon, he received only a fragment of a blade in which an echo of lost power could still be felt. It was with this blade that the legendary ranker Susanoo once managed to destroy an ancient monster and stop a catastrophe. To restore the blade's ability to cut through flesh and bone, Jack must find the remaining fragments of the sword. In addition to the weapon fragment, he was given the 8th heart of the serpent, a rare crystal filled with power and deadly poison. It was impossible to use it right away, and Shuri made it clear that without preparation, this trophy was more dangerous than the enemy. She warned without unnecessary emotion, thoughtless use of poison will lead to irreversible consequences. Their conversation was interrupted when the egg suddenly made itself known, clearly expressing its displeasure and hunger. The creature appeared suddenly and without hesitation grabbed the carcass of the fallen snake right in front of everyone. The monster turned out to be huge, covered in many eyes, and its appearance was unlike any idea of the creatures of the tower. Even Shuri, who had seen many monsters, could not immediately hide her confusion. Only after part of the snake had disappeared did the egg calm down and fall asleep again. Jack preferred not to go into explanations, calling what was happening the quirks of his pet. Still, it's not every day you see a creature capable of calmly devouring the descendant of a dragon. Once the egg had quieted down, Jack turned his attention to planning his next steps. All this time, Shuri had thought he was connected to Christopher, but now doubt appeared in her eyes. She didn't understand who he really was, but she felt that even the heavens had underestimated him. As they parted, Shuri wished him luck and made it clear that she would watch over his progress. A straightforward and strong warrior, she still believed in the tower's rules, even when they began to crack. In her past life, Shuri had already played an important role in Jack's fate, and history could repeat itself. Leaving the Colosseum, Jack had cemented his place in history by taking first place in the overall rankings. Within a few days, rumors about him had spread throughout the tower, growing into speculation. Some called him the new Christopher, others an unknown man from Earth. The fewer facts there were, the faster the interest in his figure grew. Without delay, Jack continued climbing and months later reached the 9th floor. The labyrinth became a test of the mind, requiring calculation and patience rather than brute force. Sometimes the path had to be paved with fists when other options ran out. Having completed the test, Jack headed to a long-planned meeting with Hephaestus. He commissioned the blacksmith to do a new job and now wanted to see the result with his own eyes. As always, the heat in the workshop was unbearable, as if the flame itself refused to die down. Jack talked about the tests he had passed, not noticing how he was distracting the master from his work. In truth, he was in the way, but Hephaestus was too well-mannered to drive the guest away. Finally, the blacksmith presented an unmarked sword, assembled from various materials and devoid of external gloss. The weapon looked simple, but it had high conductivity for low-level mana. Apparently, Jack had his own plan for which he needed this blade. He paid generously, never hesitating when it came to those he trusted. After this, Jack went through the portal and received a reward for completing the labyrinth. Now he could move up to double-digit floors and start a new stage in his life. The 10th floor greeted us with a world of martial arts, where the weak are not recognized. The best fighters have gathered here, ready to tear apart any stranger. The competition promised to be cutthroat, exactly what Jack was looking for. The martial arts world was a vast continent, surrounded by sea on all sides and filled with ancient conflicts. From the very beginning, dozens of clans operated here, each of them hunting for talented newcomers. Unlike other floors, the test began immediately after reaching the 10th floor. Those who failed were stuck in this world forever, never seeing the next levels of the tower. Jack almost immediately encountered a man who invited him to join the clan as a newcomer. He refused politely and without arrogance, but the clan leader clearly did not like this answer. He pulled out his sword and decided to attract attention by publicly beating up the impudent newcomer. In doing so, he made a mistake for which he paid faster than he expected. Jack had to give a cold, piercing look that made his opponent's legs buckle. By the time the clan leader realized he had messed with the wrong person, it was too late. Fear gripped his body, and within seconds everyone around him was whispering about his humiliation. The newcomer to the 10th floor defeated his opponent calmly and without the slightest effort. The clan representatives hastened to drag the leader away, trying to cover up the shame. After this, Jack walked forward for several weeks, covering thousands of kilometers across an alien and hostile world. In the world of martial arts, there was no convenient transportation, and everyone had to rely only on their own feet. By evening, he finally reached the desired area, feeling that the goal was already close. As the sun set, Jack sensed the approach of 24 warriors. Their experience was felt in the aura, heavy and ominous, like before the start of a massacre. He stopped and did not prepare for battle. Jack came here to talk. Soon, armed men appeared, representatives of one of the clans. It was a unit that had long opposed the oligarchy and collaborated with the Moonrise Coalition. They said that they were now locked in the Tian Shan Mountains and that it was here that they decided the fate of the future world. Robert greeted the newcomer and immediately realized that this was no ordinary player. Jack said directly that he came for a test and wanted to prove his level. It has been a long time since anyone has even dared to take this test. Most players avoided him, as the chance of success was practically zero. Robert tried to intimidate Jack by saying that he didn't have a chance. No one had ever passed this test before, but Jack never looked for the easy way out. That is why today was no exception. The disposition process was initiated, and the system opened a portal. Very soon, the player would be overtaken by hallucinations that could lead him astray. He had to go through the forest, find the devil, and manage to negotiate. Jack trusted his instincts and stepped forward without hesitation. His main advantage was the skill of flaming eyes, which allowed him to see through deception. After wandering through the forest for a long time, he finally found the right path. A small house appeared ahead, too neat for the wild forest. Inside, a living historian of the martial arts world was waiting for him. This old man existed even before the founders of the world became the ancient gods. He was called the Devil, but was also known as the Sage. A slight gust of wind revealed the illusion. The house was not real, and Jack was still in the forest. He stated that he wanted to demonstrate his capabilities and prove the value of cooperation. In response, the devil activated the flash, and the illusory house disappeared. Finally, he announced that the player had been accepted and that his journey in the world of martial arts was just beginning. Having finished his business in the forest, Jack returned to the city, the only safe place in this area of the 10th floor. It was an ordinary town where people lived who were forever stuck in the world of martial arts. Robert still found it hard to believe that the newcomer had managed not only to find the devil, but also to come to an agreement with him. Usually players didn't even get close to the legend, but Jack came out of the forest as if it was a walk. Illusions were no obstacle to him, and it seemed as if the floor itself could not stop him. No one had ever heard of a stranger passing through such traps so easily before. This meant only one thing. A man capable of disrupting the established order had appeared in the world of martial arts. While the discussions were going on around him, Jack lay calmly in a warm bath, washing away the fatigue of the long journey. After a series of trials, sometimes it is important to just stop and give your body a break. The 10th floor was unlike the others. It required both strength and cold calculation. The mistake was too costly, but the right decision could determine fate forever. As he rested, the egg next to him moved slightly, as if reacting to the warmth. In recent months, thoughts about what was hidden inside never left Jack, day or night. After the Colosseum, it became clear that something truly dangerous was brewing within the shell. When the creature devoured the snake's head without hesitation, the alarming suspicions only grew stronger. Dozens of eyes and sharp fangs returned in dreams again and again. On the one hand, there was the threat of a monster appearing that could destroy everything around. On the other hand, there is a weak but stubborn hope that this creature will become an ally. The outer gods have no permanent form, and this explained the egg's oppressive aura. Conclusions will have to be drawn later when the shell finally cracks. In the meantime, Jack carried the egg with him, trying to create ideal conditions for it. Warm water accelerated development. This technique was familiar to him from his previous life. In a strange way, the egg helped him to distract himself because new trials awaited him ahead. The next day, Jack headed to the main palace of the Tetris territory. By the time he arrived, influential gods and martial arts masters had already gathered there. There have been no truly worthy candidates here in recent decades. Now the situation has changed, and the presence of a newcomer has made many people tense. Old Man Gilbert called for calm, reminding everyone that the boy had not yet proven his limit. So far, he had only made a deal with the devil, and that was only the first step. The next test was to prove his true level of martial arts. Representatives of the clans gathered in the hall and knelt before the masters. Soon the doors swung open, and the silhouette of a stranger appeared in the doorway. The experienced warrior's gazes slitted over him, trying to catch the slightest detail. It wasn't every day that they saw a man stand before them who had overcome illusions and returned alive. Jack calmly endured the gazes of the four stern gods without looking away. The second test was not to be against the demon, but against themselves. The Black Wind Commander was the first to kneel. He stated that he wanted to personally challenge the newcomer and test his skills. For him, it was a chance to earn a promotion and a new rank. For Jack, it's another step to the next floor. The motives were different, but the outcome could only be one. Jack accepted the challenge without further ado. As the commander drew his sword, a red glint ran across his eyes. It seemed as if an alien power was raging within him, fueled by the promise of the red blood altar. These showy effects did not impress Jack. He concentrated, cut out everything unnecessary, and gathered his attention on one point. His gaze slid over his opponent, noting his stance, breathing, and small movements. The monkey eyes instantly simulated the beginning of the fight, building a chain of options. A slight smile flickered across Jack's face, but there was no mockery in it. The commander took it personally and lost his cool, forgetting the main rule of a warrior. The commander's sweeping blows were too easy to read, wide, drawn out, and lacking precision, as if he had long been accustomed to winning with force alone. Jack moved calmly from the line of attack, economizing on movement and repeatedly demonstrating a well-calibrated defense without unnecessary tension. He was in no hurry to finish the fight, deliberately dragging out the tempo and gradually depriving his opponent of breath and confidence. Each miss only increased the commander's rage, making his movements rougher and less controlled. As soon as the opponent's rhythm was completely disrupted, Jack abruptly changed the tempo and launched a swift counterattack. Partial gigantization intensified the blow, and all the accumulated force fell upon the commander in one short burst. For the first time in decades, the clan saw blood on the face of a man considered a paragon of fortitude. The one who was respected for his endurance and skill was swept away by a pressure that was like a blow from the earth itself. While the audience froze in silence, Gilbert merely frowned and continued to watch Jack's every move closely. In this duel, he saw not just a victory, but the beginning of a force capable of changing the balance on the 10th floor. What was particularly striking was that Jack gained the upper hand without ever having to use his sword. The victory was declared unconditional, and Jack was granted the right to use the red blood altar. This spiritual medicine was considered a rare artifact, known only to a few, even among the veterans of the floor. Most players didn't even know that there was a pill that could save their life at a critical moment. Such a trophy was given only to those whose strength was proven in front of everyone. After this fight, the attitude towards Jack changed. He was now perceived as a real contender for the top. Rex stepped forward himself, openly declaring that he wanted to personally test the newcomer and erase his self-confidence. Gilbert announced that the third test would take place in 3 months to allow both fighters to reach peak condition. The name of his future opponent did not cause Jack any doubt or anxiety. To emphasize this, he proposed to hold the fight immediately without waiting for the appointed time. There was a noise in the hall. Such a challenge had not been heard here for a very long time. For the Tatras clan, this sounded like a direct challenge to their hierarchy and established order. Rex was ready to take the fight, wanting to crush the daring newcomer at the first opportunity. However, Gilbert put a firm stop to the situation, reminding that rules are not there for decoration. He repeated his decision. The third test will take place in exactly 3 months. There was no choice left, and the remaining time had to be used to maximum advantage. The very next day, almost the entire city was discussing the stranger who came from another planet. The man who defeated the commander without a weapon instantly became the main topic of conversation. Jack met with Gilbert alone, avoiding prying ears and glances. The old man suggested focusing on preparation and not wasting oneself on empty conflicts. He pointed to a library of martial arts and rare potions available in the west of the city. At the same time, it became known that Rex had assembled a professional team and begun intensive training. By the time of the fight, he should have reached the limit of his capabilities. and underestimation could cost him his life. Jack thanked Gilbert and made it clear that he intended to write his name in the clan's history in gold letters. Without delay, he headed to the shops for medicines and necessary ingredients. The shop owner was stunned by the volume and rarity of the order. Jack bought almost all the supplies, explaining that they were needed for special work. He was considered a madman, although he acted with complete confidence in every choice. Having collected everything he needed, Jack went into the mountains, away from prying eyes. There he found a training cave, where the best masters had been honing their body and spirit for centuries. This place allowed one to be alone for a long time and not be distracted by the outside world. The preparation did not begin with practicing punches or stances, as many would have expected. This time, Jack focused on developing resistance to poisons and destructive substances. Most of the ingredients served only as a preparatory stage for the body. Once the body was ready, it was time for the real toxin. The eighth heart of the snake was used without hesitation. He had already experienced a similar experiment in the past and miraculously survived. Now the crystal was even more dangerous, and a much more brutal process lay ahead. As soon as I swallowed the heart, my body began to malfunction, as if the system had cracked from the inside. Spasms racked every muscle, and the interface howled, registering the extreme state. The flow of mana inside the body reached its extreme level, as if the energy was looking for any way to escape. It seemed that just a little more, and the body simply would not withstand the pressure of the raging elements. The lips turned blue. The breathing became ragged, as if the body had been immersed in icy water for a long time. A whole month had passed since the experiment began, and the lack of news began to worry those around. Robert was at the foot of the mountain all this time, not understanding what exactly was happening in the cave. Jack was given a rare chance to prepare for the 10th floor challenge, but instead of training, he disappeared from the world for weeks. This behavior looked especially strange, given that his future opponent was preparing non-stop. One day, thick smoke burst out from the depths of the cave, and along with it, a heavy, ominous aura. Robert and his assistant tensed as if something dead had appeared in front of them. Instead of a strong fighter, they saw a withered figure, more like a living dead man. After a month without food, Jack turned into a walking skeleton, barely able to stand on his feet. He was immediately taken to the market in an attempt to somehow restore his body's strength. Sunken eyes, slow movements, and dulled reactions clearly showed the cost of the ritual. But the main thing was done. The crystal was absorbed, and with it, new possibilities opened up. Now all that was left was to get back into shape as quickly as possible and prepare for the fight. During the conversation, Robert put the picture together. The collection of medicinal herbs was not random. They helped the body remove deadly toxins. Once Jack was able to eat properly, the next step was the library. This huge building housed the knowledge accumulated by generations of masters. Martial arts here were transmitted through books, available to anyone who dared to learn. In the world of martial arts, even one such book would be considered a priceless gift. Jack entered the library quietly and saw an ocean of possibilities before him. Here one could study any direction, even that which had long been considered lost. There were only 2 months left before the exam, but this was enough with the right approach. The fight with the unit's representative promised to be tough. The opponent was among the strongest. Jack's advantage was hidden in the memories of his past life, which gave him a head start. He knew that the key to victory lay in the foundation of the Tatris clan's martial art. This knowledge was once implanted by the devil, and now all that remained was to assimilate part of it. Gilbert soon learned of the newcomer's strange training. He was worried about how one person was going to study all the books in the library in such a short time. Something like this seemed impossible even for years. Jack's behavior had been questionable ever since he bought up all the medicinal herbs. Sometimes there was a feeling that they were either dealing with a genius or a skillful fake. All that remained was to wait for the exam and see what he would show in battle with an elite warrior. After some time, Jack finished studying literature and moved on to practice. He had found everything he was looking for, and now he had to consolidate his knowledge with his body. The next month passed in continuous training until the day of the exam arrived. Rex looked perfectly conditioned, his muscles seeming to burst through his skin from the inside. Even the most experienced fighters enviously assessed his physical form. He entered the arena with complete confidence, having no doubt about the outcome of the fight. The crowd was noisy, discussing the fight and placing bets. Almost everyone was confident of Rex's victory. The only thing they were arguing about was how quickly it would all end. When he appeared in the arena, the roar became so loud that one of the clan gods winced. At first, he tried to calm the audience with his gaze, but it was not enough. I had to order him to be silent, so that the test would proceed according to the canons of Tatris. Soon, a newcomer in his red cloak entered the arena. The crowd joked about him impersonating Superman, but the words didn't mean anything to him. His gaze was fixed only on his opponent. The rest of the world disappeared. The exam began, and Rex, considered the favorite, was the first to attack. His thunder technique was known to anyone who had ever encountered the Tatris clan. A thunderous attack crashed into the arena, causing the stone beneath their feet to crack under the pressure. Everyone knows this technique. It destroys everything in its path, and now the blow was aimed straight at Jack. He held onto the block, skillfully distributing the force throughout his body. Otherwise, he would have simply been crushed on the spot. If I were to miss a blow without defending myself, the fight would end instantly, without the right to a second attempt. He had fought strong rankers before, but the stakes were lower then, and his body was fresher. Now the opponent is stronger. The cost of a mistake is higher, and this fight could easily be his last. Rex changed his rhythm and launched Thousand Fist Strike, turning the attack into a continuous pressure attack. Blocking the barrage became more difficult, and more mana was spent on defense without stopping. My stamina began to fail. My legs became heavy, and my breathing became labored, as if the battle was dragging me into sticky mud. To maintain the defense, we had to burn energy too quickly, and the reserves were melting away right before our eyes. In the first minutes, Jack was exhausted, unable to respond with a blow, although the fight already required initiative. Rex pressed more confidently, as if breaking down a wall, and each new approach made him only more impudent. Confidence spurred him on, and the pressure became harder without pauses, as if he had decided to finish it all now. At this moment, the duel reached a turning point. Only the one who takes the risk first will survive. Either Rex's pressure will crush the newcomer, or Jack will be able to break the tempo and turn the fight around. Jack kept a cool head and waited for the moment when his opponent would open up with his own attack. He took the blow, braced himself, and immediately began moving in response, not giving Rex a chance to catch his breath. This trap has worked before. The enemy opens up an attack, and the response flies into a gap in the defense. At such moments, they strike ahead, and delay is more expensive than any pain and fatigue. Rex's strike was stopped, and for the first time, viewers saw the newcomer not only survive, but change the course of the fight. The Dark Knight sword finally entered the fray, and the metal hummed as if it itself demanded blood and finality. The favorite no longer looked invincible. Now every step he took could turn into a mistake. Herbert watched especially closely, trying to understand where the newcomer got his form and pace from. The Sky Devil form became noticeable in his movements, as if Jack had been carrying it in his body for years. The secret was simple: the right book, the right base, and endless practice without the right to cut corners. Now he showed results, not with words or posture, but with pure work in combat under pressure. The Heavenly Devil's technique kept him on par with an elite warrior, not losing in speed or strength. Every exchange caused a roar in the arena, and applause washed over the stands in waves like a storm. Blood appeared on Rex's tongue, and rage began to squeeze out his calculation, making the blows rougher. Jack strengthened his body by gigantization so that he wouldn't collapse under the pressure and could withstand the next onslaught. The collisions took their toll on both of them, and each exchange left new wounds that could no longer be hidden. But stopping meant defeat, so both of them continued on, even when their bodies demanded they fall. Another exchange produced no winner, and the fight became like a long saw, where tenacity wins. The crowd was starting to tire, but it was precisely this anticipation that made the moment of victory even more poignant. The difference in levels was barely noticeable, and so every blow felt like a bid for legend. By the end of the fight, Rex no longer looked like a man, but like a creature that lives only on anger and strength. He hit hard and hard, but his power only grew, as if rage was feeding his body from within. Stone fists rushed towards Jack's skull, but the giant's stand withstood the pressure without breaking. Finally, the fight reached the decisive second, when one miss would have put an end to it. Jack took the blow and showed that he was not inferior in strength, endurance, or will. The sword was ready to decapitate Rex. All that was left was to hit accurately and not let him take a step away. The blade, forged by a brilliant blacksmith, shot forward and cut through the air in one motion. Rex managed to dodge, but the blade still caught the flesh, leaving a bloody streak on the body. This blood became the boundary. Now defeat became real, and not a theoretical, terrible word. Rex trembled not from fear, but from shock, because he did not allow such an outcome in principle. It became clear. The test had been passed, and retreat would no longer save his reputation and confidence. With slightly higher stats, Jack would have finished him off right away, and Rex could see it perfectly well. That is why he admitted defeat before the final blow, without waiting for humiliation in the arena. The spectators froze, not believing their eyes, because the favorite had never lost in their memory. There was no miracle here. There was technique, preparation, and cold calculation, all combined into one result. The masters did not intervene because the victory was fair and fully complied with the rules of the challenge. The Sky Devil watched the fight from the far VIP box, showing no emotion for a moment. The second trial of the Heavenly Devil was closed perfectly, without any controversial points or reservations. Jack showed the spirit of the Heavenly Devil so clearly that even the old men stopped doubting his path. He brought back forgotten techniques that local masters considered the dust of the past and dead legends. After such an outcome, Rex had nothing to be ashamed of. He was defeated not by cunning, but by skill. No one expected their opponent to master the legendary form in just a month, without any mentors or concessions. Rex laughed as if he had heard a good joke, and this relieved the tension from his own wound. He said it straight out. There is no shame, because he lost to a man who will very soon become a legend. Rex asked me to remember his words. One day, Jack's name would make the upper floors of the tower tremble. Now the Heavenly Devil will find a player himself to carry out the final test, without delays or discounts. After the fight, Jack went to get treatment, because the accumulated damage could no longer be hidden by his cloak and posture. From the outside, he looked like a stone, but inside, everything was burning, and his body was only holding on by willpower. During the fight, one of his arms was almost completely unresponsive, and any further delay would have seen him collapse without even waiting for a doctor. The thought of giving up flashed through his mind, but Rex admitted defeat first, cutting it off mid-sentence. It's always like this. A champion seems ironclad until you see how he pays in blood for every second. There was a knock at the door, and the messenger delivered a short message. The Heavenly Devil is waiting for a personal meeting right now. The wounded Jack still went to the Founder's Palace, because refusal here is tantamount to a death sentence. An ominous aura immediately pressed him inside, as if walls were pressing in from all sides and not allowing him to breathe. Somewhere nearby there was a devil for whom people are dust, and this could be felt without words or threats. After taking a few steps, Jack saw the master on the throne, sitting as calmly as if the fight was child's play. His violet eyes emphasized his power, and the silence around him sounded louder than any command. The Heavenly Devil declared, "The final test begins, and there will be no time for recovery." Jack's hand barely moved, but there was no choice, and weakness was not respected here. He wanted to arrive in perfect shape, but life dealt him a different blow, forcing him to reach the final on the rocks. To follow the devil, one had to cross the barrier of true suppression without retreating even a step. Last time the flaming eyes helped, but this time the pressure was higher and immediately stopped the attempt. The barrier pressed down on the body like a press, and a few moments seemed like an eternity, where the decision was made whether to live or fall. Only minutes later, Jack broke through, wresting the right to go further, despite the pain and weakness. So he entered the Heavenly Devil Hall and began the final test of the 10th floor, with no way back. Space suddenly distorted, and the next moment, Jack found himself in a cold, unknown place where even the air seemed alien and heavy. It resembled a deep underground cave, hidden from all living things, as if it had been deliberately hidden outside the familiar world. The heavenly demon, who was also called the devil, ordered everyone to follow him without further ado, and there was no point in arguing here. To keep his footing, Jack had to light a fire and move forward carefully, peering at the stone path. After a few steps, he stopped, his eyes wide as what he saw made his heart skip a beat. A strange fire burned before him, causing a shiver to run through his skin that was neither like fear nor like ordinary tension. The flame looked supernatural, alien to this world, and at the same time frighteningly attractive, as if there was a will hidden within it. His origins clearly extended beyond the tower, but at that moment, something else was more important. The elements themselves stood before him. It was the divine flame that had been kept here for centuries, not allowing anyone to approach without reason. A long time ago, a martial arts school discovered it on a mountain and immediately realized the true value of the find. Since then, the masters have protected the fire and searched for someone who could become its true master without destroying everything around it. Many of them gave their lives in accordance with this tradition and did not deviate from their duty even in death. Now the guardian of the flame was the heavenly demon, who honored the memory of the past and continued the test. This is how the main and most dangerous test of the 10th floor of the tower came about. The Tetris clan tested all willing players, weeding out the weak and those who broke under pressure. Only the most steadfast were allowed to speak with the demon, where their future fate was decided. Only by proving mastery of martial arts could a player gain the right to approach the divine flame. During all this time, not a single person has been able to subdue this terrible and unruly element. Many tried to reach the final, but only one managed to get close to the last stage of the test. For several days he tried unsuccessfully to control the flames until he finally fell, leaving the attempt unfinished. Now the final test was to be Jack's path. The guy in the red cloak always stood out from the others, but whether it would be enough against the heavenly elements remained an open question. The answer will become known very soon, if he doesn't break down and retreat before the most important step. Just recently, he blocked the attacks of the rankers and mastered the heavenly demon technique, proving his right to stand here. But before the eternal flame, all these achievements looked insignificant, like child's play. The demon looked at him carefully, as if silently wishing him luck and at the same time testing his resolve. The flaming eyes activated, and Jack took a step towards the elements, not allowing himself to hesitate. He stepped into the fire, and the warmth touched his chest, spreading deep inside, as if inviting him to take on the challenge. The first moments brought a strange calm, as if the flame did not resist his presence. But very soon the elements began to test his strength, gradually increasing the pressure. It didn't feel like absorbing crystals, and it wasn't accompanied by the sharp pain he was used to. The body trembled, the skin became covered in sweat, and the feeling of peace was replaced by a heavy and oppressive tension. Jack returned to the past in order to change fate and destroy the gods that rule this world. He walked this path for the sake of humanity, which needed a second chance at survival. Once close, friends gave everything to give him this opportunity and faith in the future. Now, fighting the elements, he held them in his memory more firmly than any vows. Retreating would mean betraying their victim, and he could not allow that to happen. Gathering all his will, Jack accepted the challenge of the eternal flame and continued to move forward. The flames flared brighter, and the entire underground cave was filled with an ominous pink light. The pressure became almost unbearable, and even the magic cloak stopped protecting his body. The shard of Hades kept him supplied with mana, but even that was barely enough to stay conscious. The test continued until the moment when the elements themselves made a choice. The divine flame accepted Jack as its master, and the exam was completed. In addition to the huge amount of points, he received the rarest divine fire skill. The master, watching from the side, did not immediately realize what exactly had happened. For a moment, he thought Jack was dead, until a living shadow appeared in the flames. The guy not only survived, but became the first to control the unearthly elements. The master's composure cracked, and he could no longer hide it. At that very moment, Jack lost consciousness. His body had paid the full price for the victory. Several days passed, and the player's body completely returned to normal, as if the ordeal had never happened. All this time, the heavenly demon kept returning in his thoughts to the events of that night, replaying them in his memory. The divine flame accepted Jack without resistance, a fact that still puzzled the keeper. When they finally met, the guy in the red cloak looked surprisingly calm and collected. There were no burns or signs of struggle with the elements left on his body, as if the flames had not touched him at all. Jack became the new keeper of the divine flame, finally freeing the demon from his centuries-old debt. The heavenly demon had no intention of keeping him in the clan and did not require him to serve other people's interests. Jack remained free, intervening only when the situation truly got out of control. Taking advantage of this, he decided to continue climbing the tower and focus on the next floors. Finally, he promised to visit his old allies when the Great War with Murim began. Left alone, the heavenly demon stood motionless for a long time, not believing the sharp turn of his own fate. His service came to an end, and the obligations that had bound him for many years crumbled in an instant. For the first time, he didn't know what he would wake up for tomorrow, because his whole life revolved around protecting the flame. Perhaps it was time to return to Murim, while Jack was on his way to conquer the 11th floor. By this point, dozens of players had already gathered there, and the system divided them into two opposing teams. Halliman, a mid-level loser, had already failed at this particular stage of the tower more than once. The system once again sent him to a weak team that had to fight against real professionals. It looked as if the gods were openly mocking him, leaving him no chance. He had almost resigned himself to defeat until he noticed a familiar name among his allies. It was Jack. Rumors of the Red Cloak had long since spread throughout the tower, and even such players knew who stood before them. For the first time in a long time, Halliman felt a faint but real hope. A little later, Jack himself arrived on the 11th floor without attracting any unnecessary attention. The examiner for the test turned out to be Hypnosis, an Olympian ranker with a dubious reputation. It was obvious that Olympus would not miss the chance to get revenge for past humiliations. This test promised to bring many problems, but Jack was ready for them. The first thing he decided to do was exchange Asgardian banknotes, which were to become the basis for future purchases. The local administrator had rarely seen a deal of this scale and did not hide his surprise. The 11th floor players didn't carry that kind of money with them, and it was immediately obvious. Gold coins poured in one after another, and Jack's balance almost tripled. He then summoned a fairy assistant to discuss another, much more complex deal. He was interested in a rare metal called adamantium. There were rumors that it was practically impossible to acquire, since it simply did not exist on the open market. It was no accident that Jack stayed at this hotel. Even the impossible could be obtained here. There were more than 1.5 kilograms of metal in the store, and the fairy herself had to name the price. The sum turned out to be exorbitant, and even Jack did not have enough money to pay it off immediately. Adamantium was valued no less than mithril, and for good reason. Its history began back in the days when Hephaestus created a helmet for Hades. Since then, the strongest rankers have dreamed of obtaining equipment made from this metal. Jack needed it to create something truly special. He had no intention of getting into debt and was prepared to postpone the purchase until a better time. Realizing that the guy would not overpay, the fairy agreed to make concessions. The bidding dragged on, requiring composure and endurance, but this was precisely what Jack was particularly good at. He soon achieved his goal, breaking the seller's resistance. Even the fairy was forced to admit that she was dealing with a master negotiator. The price dropped almost in half, and Jack got the metal he wanted. Having said goodbye to the fairy, he began to think about his next steps. It was necessary to meet with Hephaestus and give him a new task. It's best to do this after the test, which is only a week away. Jack decided to spend the remaining time usefully, calmly observing the world around him. On the 11th floor, there was already a pure-blooded player, a descendant of the Namgung clan and the son of the head of the Murim Guild. His name was Javier, but in the tower, he was known by another name, the Genius Player. Together with his elite team, he has just completed clearing one of the most difficult labyrinths. Somewhere ahead, a terrifying boss lurked, but the confident fighters felt no fear. Javier knew that their opponents would be newcomers with little skill. Most of the team clearly underestimated their opponents. Although the captain asked them not to let their guard down, he was always distinguished by his cold calculation and knew that in the tower, one could not relax for a second. Moreover, it became known that the weak team would have a player in a red cloak, and this already changed the picture. As Javier moved through the cave, he noticed a flash of pink flame that left a strange trail in the air. He slowed his pace and tension hung in the silence, as if the cave itself was warning of danger. Within moments, the entire team saw something they were not prepared for. The huge spider, considered the boss of this floor, lay motionless on the ground. At first, the fighters mechanically attacked the monster, but it did not react in any way. The legendary spider of Agre was dead, and death had overtaken him long before their appearance. The most frightening thing was that someone killed him with one precise blow to the heart. Even Javier found it difficult to imagine the level of force required for such an outcome. Everything pointed to the fact that a purebred rancor had been here and deprived them of the main prize. I had to come to terms with the loss and leave the labyrinth empty-handed. At the same time, Jack had already received a reward, the Thread of Agrea. It was he who destroyed the legendary boss single-handedly, without the help of any allies. Past life experience and cold-blooded calculation once again proved decisive. After acquiring the pink flame, he reached a new level, capable of challenging the strongest. Control over the elements was still unstable and required constant practice. The flame burned not only the enemies, but also the mind, forcing them to get used to a new level of power. Already the 11th floor had given him more than he had expected to receive. The level was rising rapidly, but that didn't mean we could let our guard down. At the local hotel, Jack finally met up with his team. They looked at him as if he were a living legend. Jack himself assessed them differently, without illusions and unnecessary respect. Halliman was the first to introduce himself and proudly declared that he was glad to fight alongside the hero of the first floors. Jack's name had long been on everyone's lips, and they were eager to team up with him for victory. This idea immediately seemed suspicious and too disadvantageous to him. These players wanted to be around when the reward was given, hoping to snag at least a piece of the loot. When Jack said it out loud, their faces changed noticeably. He made it clear that he was not going to drag the weak and the indecisive along with him. Everyone here is responsible only for themselves, and those who are afraid had better leave right now. These words came as a shock to the team, as they had expected a completely different reception. Instead of a noble hero, they saw a man acting solely in his own interests. Jack never pretended to be a gentleman or hid his position. It was a shock to the players, and no one knew how to react next. Halliman lost his last hope and barely restrained himself from cursing his star ally. Meanwhile, in an elite building on the 11th floor, a local examiner was preparing. Hypnosis, acting on orders from Olympus, was ready to do anything to gain the favor of the highest elite. His main task was to create conditions in which a player named Jack would not be able to survive. The faction hated the Red Cloak and was waiting for the right moment to get rid of it. All the parameters of the test were set against Jack, and the chances were slim to none. After completing their preparations, the players gathered in a dark forest called Ilium. The test was about to begin, and the tension was palpable in every movement. Far more players withdrew from participation than originally expected. After learning that Jack was not going to cooperate, many decided that it was impossible to win here. Despite the losses, part of the team still showed up for the test and proved by their presence that they were not without courage. Hypnosis greeted the players and immediately made it clear that there would be no cancellation of the test. The fact that one of the teams ended up in the minority did not bother the system at all. The rules turned out to be extremely simple. You need to collect as many red flags as possible. These flags were scattered throughout the forest, which was filled with monsters and other deadly creatures. Moreover, flags were allowed to be obtained not only in battles with monsters. Players could kill opponents from the enemy team and take their trophies for themselves. This condition made the test especially tough, bloody, and tense. There was also an additional rule: the king's crown doubling the number of flags. In each team, the system itself determined the king, turning him into a key figure. The test resembled a game of chess, where the king's defense decided the fate of the entire team. Having announced all the conditions, Hypnosis officially launched the 11th floor test. The king of the team of weaklings unexpectedly became Halaman, who nevertheless decided to take a risk. It was hard to understand how he even got to the 11th floor, as if it was an evil joke from the gods. Jack had no intention of joining forces with anyone and headed deep into the forest alone. He ordered the king to keep a low profile, sit quietly, and stick to safe areas. Jack took on all the rest of the work, promising to collect the maximum number of flags. Meanwhile, the enemy team had gathered elite fighters led by a descendant of the Namgung family. They had an advantage not only in class, but also in numbers, which made them the favorites. Many had already relaxed and were mentally celebrating the victory, not even suspecting that it was just beginning. Angel Rose sensed the captain's tension and tried to persuade him to relax a little. She was considered one of the best supports in the tower, and many called her a true angel. Her healing abilities were top-notch, meaning her presence gave the team a huge advantage. However, Javier had long noticed something odd about this test. The system was supposed to make a random selection, but it seemed to deliberately single out one team. He knew that nothing happened without a reason, and this made him wary. His mind told him to relax, but one incident was bothering him. Before the dead spider was found, he noticed a pink flash of flame and couldn't forget about it. It all seemed too strange, as if there was a person nearby who could change the course of the test. Halaman did not interfere in the battles with the monsters and strictly followed the captain's orders. He sat quietly, not trying to be a hero, while the other players collected red flags. There was only one man on his team who was capable of bringing in a big catch, and Halaman decided to trust him. This time, Jack wasn't eager to help the weak, but he had no choice. If the king dies, all his efforts will be in vain. Jack himself was somewhere deep in the forest and had no idea what was happening behind him. The rest of the team was left vulnerable to a surprise attack by enemies. The elite team decided to take advantage of the moment and destroy their opponents with one blow. They hid in the bushes and attacked like predators going out to hunt. The difference in levels was enormous, and Halaman could clearly smell the smell of death. There was no room left in his soul for hope. Past defeats had long ago taught him to be a realist. The weaker players desperately tried to defend themselves, but their chances were melting away with every second. They became easy victims of circumstances and could do nothing about it. At some point, the king tripped and fell, exposing himself to a fatal blow. He was sure that he was about to lose his head, and he felt warm blood splash on his face. Only a moment later did Halaman realize that this blood belonged to the enemy. Jack arrived in time and defended his king like an experienced grandmaster who had read the game in advance. At that moment, it became clear that his advice should have been listened to from the very beginning. If the team had stayed in safe zones and been more attentive, this would not have happened. When the very hero the whole tower was talking about appeared, even the strongest players trembled. Their confidence crumbled to dust, and their legs began to give way from fear. But even after the defeat, there were madmen who did not retreat and immediately became easy prey for the wolf in the thicket without having time to understand anything. Their leader drew two blades and roared that he would personally behead the fake in the red cloak, proving to everyone who was stronger here. He always looked at Jack as an inflated legend who did not deserve applause and lived only on rumors. But today this confidence was shattered. The opponent moved too smoothly, too coolly, as if he knew every step in advance. The next moment, his head split in two, and it became clear. The sword of the Dark Knight had done its job without unnecessary gestures and pathos. The red eyes flashed so brightly that even experienced fighters involuntarily slowed down, as if the air around them had become heavier. Jack raised the flags without any fuss, and his team's score began to climb, as if the system itself had acknowledged his presence. The rest wavered, began to back away and huddle together, not believing that everything had ended so quickly and cruelly. In the end, they did the safest thing. They gave up their red flags and hurried to base, rather than continue the fight. The rookie team got extra points for the cleanup, but they were still behind, and the gap was uncomfortably pressing. Halaman tried to justify himself. He just wanted to find a couple of flags. And that's why he climbed out of the safe zone. After what he saw, he didn't need to explain anymore. A second such outing could end immediately and completely. Now he just had to stay out of the way, let Jack work, and not create problems where there were already too many of them. Both teams had already collected impressive amounts of loot, and this meant one thing. The easy part was over. The real game was beginning. No one wanted to risk fighting monsters in the forest anymore when it was more profitable to hunt each other. The players switched to stealing flags and began to closely monitor the kings, choosing the moment to strike. The king doubled the spoils, so killing the enemy king quickly became a priority, more important than any personal scores. Halaman, the king of a weak team, was becoming the main target and needed to be hidden as deep as possible. If he gets killed, the team practically loses its chance of winning, because even dozens of flags won't save them from doubling. That's why Jack was ready to cover for this slug until the end, not out of kindness, but out of cold calculation. It was now that the captain of the elite began to understand that the test had only just begun, and the first skirmishes were just a warm-up. When he was informed that more than 10 fighters had failed to cope with the Red Cloak, the mood in the detachment changed. He warned his men not to relax, but he didn't expect Jack to be so effective and ruthless. However, the elite still had an advantage in numbers, and this resource could not be wasted in isolated skirmishes. Rose suggested gathering the strongest and coming out with a single fist to wipe out the Red Cloak with one blow. With her support, even mid-level fighters became more dangerous, and she clearly intended to take advantage of this. She spoke confidently, calmly, without a tremor in her voice. That's how those who already see victory in their minds speak. The decision was made quickly. They were taking revenge, and a smile flashed across the angel's face, too similar to a devilish one. Time was evaporating before our eyes. Most of the test had already passed, and every minute was now worth flags and lives. Jack stayed close to the king and cold-bloodedly cut down those who tried to approach, leaving no second chance for the enemies. He took their flags so easily that it began to look suspicious, as if the opponents were not playing at full strength. Too many elite players abandoned their prey and retreated, as if their goal was not to defeat him, but to lure him deeper. And when the thought took shape, it was too late. The trap was already closing, and the exits were disappearing one after another. It really did resemble chess, where the opponent had set up bait in advance and was waiting for you to make exactly the right move. When Jack saw the whole picture, he had to act instantly. No pause, no second chance. He managed to intercept the arrow flying straight into the king's eye, and this movement saved not only his life, but also all his glasses. Kalaman's whole life flashed before his eyes, and he realized that he was about to die. He was saved only by the fact that there was a man nearby who knew how to break the back of fate with his bare hands. The nets that rose around Jack were painfully familiar. Such a trap does not appear by chance and does not give forgiveness. In the martial arts world, this technique was called the Web of Heaven, and it was used to lock the target in place without the ability to rush. Escaping the confines of the trap was nearly impossible. But Jack was already calculating his steps, not wasting a second. He raised a protective barrier and sternly ordered the king not to show his face, even if there was a massacre nearby. As long as Halaman stays inside, there is a chance of survival, and that is the main thing. Jack will take care of the rest. The king only has to take a step outside, and his life will end faster than he can scream or ask for help. Yet many continued to consider Jack overrated because they had not seen his work up close. They didn't understand how easily he could break strong opponents, and it was this blindness that became their first mistake. In the tower, awareness is not a bonus, but a weapon, without which any talent turns into empty bravado. Underestimate the enemy even by one step, and problems come immediately, quickly, and without mercy. Jack intercepted the spear flying at him and immediately sent it back, not allowing the trap to close completely. The subgroup leader was within millimeters of death, but even that wasn't enough to save his team. In one short moment, the Red Cloak coldly destroyed all of its allies, leaving them no chance. After this, he went to the leader, intending to obtain important information for himself at any cost. He was interested in a real captain of the elite, a descendant of the Namgung family named Javier. Gradually, Jack found the rest of the elite fighters and eliminated them one by one without making any unnecessary noise. He did everything possible to lure out of hiding those who really controlled this team. And at some point, the very individuals he was waiting for finally emerged from the darkness. Angel Rose and swordsman Javier were ready to challenge the rookie captain, not hiding their superiority. They had a serious advantage in numbers and demanded that Jack surrender immediately. According to them, beginners are not capable of winning this competition, and therefore risking their lives is pointless. Jack never liked empty chatter and always preferred tough battles to beautiful but useless words. When the enemies finally surrounded him from all sides, a calm grin appeared on the Red Cloak's face. This barely noticeable movement concealed self-confidence and a desire to test one's own limits. The more rivals Jack had, the more intense his fighting spirit became. Javier decided not to involve his allies and to personally test the strength of the man in the red cloak. He confidently declared that he would win in a fair duel, raised his sword, and walked forward without hesitation. Already in the first seconds, he realized that the player on the 11th floor could be truly dangerous. He had to activate lightning attacks and thunder support to maintain the initiative. Representative Murim had trained in fighting since childhood and was a truly experienced warrior. But his main mistake was that he went against a man who was already living his second life. Jack's experience was beyond words because it had long since gone beyond ordinary understanding. Several powerful exchanges of blows made it clear that the Red Cloak would not give up so easily. Rose could no longer stand aside and immediately intervened, strengthening her partner. Javier ordered her to stop immediately, but this girl never listened to warnings. Apparently, she sensed in advance that Jack was preparing to pull an ace out of his sleeve. The pink flame has been hidden in the shadows for a long time, but now the moment has come to show its true power. At that moment, Javier finally realized who the player was who single-handedly killed the legendary spider Agrea. There could be no coincidence. It was Jack, and the pink flame belonged to him. The Red Cloak's eyes flashed, and like a predator, he began to drive his prey into a trap. Even with all his confidence, Javier found it hard to believe that the spider had fallen from one blow. It seemed to him that someone was helping Jack. But this remained only a guess. All this time, the Red Cloak did not fight at full strength and deliberately gave a head start. Now that the real battle was about to begin, Javier knew he couldn't cope without Rose's support. Through sonic telepathy, she heard him ordering her to retreat immediately before it was too late. Javier felt that the opponent was too strong and did not want to risk the whole team. If Jack managed to clear the most dangerous dungeon on the floor, then he is truly an outstanding player. Namgung admitted his defeat, and the other participants were amazed and tried to understand what was happening. They didn't believe that a legendary figure could retreat so easily. But the tower does not forgive mistakes. Javier has always been a true leader and never stepped forward if the team could suffer. His nobility was not taken seriously in a world where only force decides. The captain was even called a coward, and only a few followed him. These were the most loyal fighters, but the majority still remained with Rose. They were confident that they could overwhelm the Red Cloak with numbers and win with impunity. Jack watched Javier's behavior closely and couldn't help but remember his old friend. Once upon a time, he met Hercules, who taught him to be a real captain. Hercules never abandoned his comrades and always put the safety of the team above his pride. If victory required too high a price, he retreated only to come back stronger. That's exactly what Javier did now, and Jack understood it perfectly. He felt a sense of respect for him, and then returned to reality, where the battle continued. Rose has already given the order and strengthened her allies before the decisive clash. These overconfident newcomers were about to get a harsh lesson in who was boss. Her unshakable belief in her own invincibility made this girl truly dangerous. She always considered herself special, but today her team faced a real devil. The pink flames erupted out of control, filling all space and distorting time itself. Jack seemed to float above the battlefield, remaining out of reach of conventional attacks. Classic techniques were ineffective, and opponents were unable to get close enough. As soon as they swung, the flames instantly burned them to ashes. In order to somehow turn the tide of the battle, Rose activated the angel wing technique and the power of a giant. She had been taught this since childhood, and this technique had never failed her before. That was until the angel encountered a demon that engulfed him in darkness. Rose had to use her most powerful skill, the executioner's sword, to somehow restrain Jack. She spared no mana and did everything possible to kill her opponent. Despite the mortal danger, the Red Cloak remained calm, as if simply observing. With one powerful move, he destroyed the giant sword, which was considered untouchable. The pink flame proved stronger than any angelic power. At this point, Rose's supporters realized that the battle had lost all meaning. Many ran away in panic, but Rose herself remained in place. She realized that Javier had been right all along, but she hadn't been wise enough to admit it. When the fog cleared, the silhouette of her opponent appeared before her. All this time, Rose was using sound telepathy to order her allies to attack the enemy team's captain, while Jack was distracted. She didn't know that he too was capable of hearing everything and had been monitoring their conversations for a long time. His skills were so widely used that resistance was futile. Jack had no intention of killing her, believing that such a refined lady should not lose her head so early. By that time, Rose already knew that Jack had rejected many guilds. Nevertheless, she tried to convince him and invite him to her team. He calmly refused, causing the girl to frown in irritation. Rose tried to explain that it was impossible to climb the tower alone. In her opinion, only a strong supporters team allows one to overcome all the challenges. She didn't understand why he was making his way more difficult when he could speed up the climb. She had no experience of her past life, and she didn't know that guilds only got in the way. They are driven by pride, greed, and endless civil strife for power over the tower. When the time comes, Jack will become the link that will unite the entire tower. It would be incredibly difficult, but that was exactly how he saw his path. Halliman was still inside the zone that the boss had outlined for him in advance and did not dare take a single step to the side. It was rapidly getting dark around him, and with each passing second, he felt his heart begin to beat faster. His nerves reached their limit at the moment when he was hit by fire from all sides. His reaction was good, but whether it would be enough to survive in such a situation remained questionable. The opponents deliberately distracted the captain and then turned around and went to attack the weak king. The unprotected newcomer instantly became easy prey for experienced sharks. However, he clearly remembered Jack's last words when he ordered him not to go outside the circle if he wanted to live. Even though he was completely surrounded, Halliman still remained inside the safe zone. He understood that attempting to escape would only hasten his death, because they would immediately catch up with him. At least he won't break the boss's rules and will do everything exactly as he was told. The experienced players gradually increased the pressure, trying to push him outside the circle. Halliman held on with all his might, stubbornly remaining in the center of the safe zone. By this point, blood was already streaming down his face, and panic had almost completely taken over his mind. It seemed that just a little more and everything would be over, and the team would lose its king. At the very moment when he mentally said goodbye to life, a strange spirit appeared out of nowhere and struck the attacker. Everyone around froze, not understanding what exactly had just happened. Heavenly Demon Spirit turned out to be one of Jack's new skills. After his success in the world of martial arts, his arsenal was replenished with another dangerous technique. That's why Jack could not worry about Halliman and calmly go about his business. The king will be fine, even if Jack gets distracted by the conversation. Now that the enemy fighters had retreated, it was time to deal with the real secret guest. Jack had long felt an alien soul here, secretly watching them from the very beginning of the test. And soon, a ghost in a mask really did emerge from the forest. He was clearly surprised to be found out, and then realized that Jack could see even his true face. Thanks to monkey eyes, the illusion was dispelled, revealing reality. Standing before Jack was the test examiner, a ranker named Hypnosis. Olympus ordered him to act as harshly as possible, and, if necessary, to intervene personally. Hypnosis came here to kill Jack. Otherwise, the mission would be considered a failure. For the Red Cloak, this was not a problem, because he could count on the immortal flame. Toxins and illusionary attacks had no effect on Jack at all. The examiner realized that the opponent was not so simple, and for the first time he felt anxiety. He activated the Dark Knight technique, hoping to completely block the Red Cloak's actions. The move seemed to work. Jack winced in pain and leaned forward. He froze in place, as if he had been hypnotized and could not move. Hypnosis instantly drew his dagger, preparing to pierce the heart of the young genius. In his imagination, he already saw Olympus congratulating him on his success and promotion. All that remained to be done was to kill the minor obstacle that was interfering with someone else's plans. But it turned out to be much more difficult, because Jack was only pretending. He gave his opponent the confidence to win, and then applied his proven martial arts techniques. As soon as he drew his sword, thick blood instantly flooded Hypnosis's body. The examiner panicked, realizing that the whole plan had fallen apart in an instant. He felt an ominous energy emanating from Jack and was no longer confident in himself. As the Red Cloak unsheathed its blade, the Dark Knight's skill suddenly came under its control. Thus began a real duel between two fighters standing on opposite sides of the tower. In past battles, Jack had difficulty against experienced rankers, but with each new fight, he became stronger and more confident. Now it was clear that this fight was much easier for him, especially after receiving the immortal fire. The first exchanges did not reveal a winner and resembled a struggle for the initiative. No one could force a rhythm, but the pressure gradually increased. Thanks to the immortal fire, Jack constantly increased the pressure, and the examiner was forced to retreat. One miss nearly turned Hypnosis into a charred skeleton. The flames were growing ever stronger, and he urgently needed to do something. He felt that the more he doubted, the more dangerous his opponent became. A player who shouldn't have been a problem turned into a real life-threatening threat. The Dark Knight's sword was ready to shed blood again and again. After a few minutes, it became clear who the favorite was. The Red Cloak dominated and constantly put pressure on his opponent. At the same time, he remained absolutely calm, as if he was fighting for the 1000th time. In order to somehow limit his skills, the examiner decided to take a desperate step. He activated the Moonsleep technique and sealed them both in a separate world. It was a closed barrier, cutting off the fighters from outside interference. Trying to buy time, Hypnosis spoke up and declared that Jack had sinned too much against Olympus. He spoke of a higher purpose, but to Jack, these words sounded almost funny. They reminded him of his whole past and the path he had already taken once. Friends and allies gave him a chance to go back in time and start over. Even Kronos sacrificed his mechanism to make this second chance a reality. Jack is driven by a higher purpose. He wants to save humanity, and this is what gives him the strength to continue. So when some pathetic slugs call themselves too important, it only makes him smile coldly. He doesn't care what difficulties come his way, because he is ready to go through hell for the sake of the result. The awareness of this difficult path even brings a calm smile to his face. It was a challenge to all the problems at once, those he was not afraid of and those he despised. At that moment, the examiner delivered a crushing blow, and for a few seconds everything around was plunged into silence. He was confident that he had caught his opponent off guard and allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. But a moment later, a terrible pain pierced his back. The enemy's sword passed through, hitting the liver and part of the stomach. This is what Jack was willing to do to achieve his goal. This man fed on the fear of his enemies and became stronger even within illusions. Red Cloak was about to finish off the wounded beast, but a third force intervened. The portal opened again, preventing him from finishing what he had started. The terrible and stern steward has appeared again, intent on restoring balance to the tower. Joshua hated Olympus for constantly interfering, and now the situation has become even worse. He immediately realized that the faction had once again interfered for its own selfish purposes. Moreover, they bribed the examiner, who was supposed to personally eliminate the players. Hypnosis tried its best to justify itself and cover up Olympus, claiming that it acted of its own free will. Joshua knew perfectly well that this was a lie, and he knew exactly who was behind what was happening. From that moment on, Hypnosis lost his status as an instructor, and Olympus lost all authority on the 11th floor. When the examiner tried to continue making excuses, the manager screamed as if a demon had possessed him. Interfering with the trials and attacking a player was considered an unforgivable crime. As punishment, the ranker was condemned to a painful existence between life and death for a period of 1,000 years. No matter how much hypnosis begged, no one listened to him anymore. All he felt was emptiness and a maddening anxiety that nothing could be done about. Jack watched this with a slight smile, as if calmly saying goodbye to the loser. When the examiner disappeared, it was time for a conversation between the truly serious figures. With his actions, the Red Cloak managed to surprise Joshua again. He was so impudent that he directly blamed the manager for everything that happened, reminding him who was responsible for order. To everyone's surprise, Joshua found this funny because there was some truth in Jack's words. He promised to personally look into the situation and pay Jack substantial compensation. Then the manager felt someone else's gaze, promised to return later, and became wary. The portal closed and Jack was left alone again. The captain of the enemy team stood nearby with his assistants. They witnessed what was happening and could not believe that Olympus was involved in such a thing. From the very beginning, they thought the test was unfair. But there was no evidence. Now they saw how the Red Cloak single-handedly dealt with the rancor. There was no doubt left. Fighting with this man meant voluntarily going to death. When the tower learns of Olympus's actions, it will cause a huge stir. Many will support the Olympians and oppose Jack, but he was so unafraid of this that he calmly declared his readiness to personally behead Zeus. These words shocked everyone and made it clear that this man has no boundaries. Jack even mentioned collaborating with Hephaestus and a weapon capable of killing gods. The conversation was interrupted when Javier received an urgent message from his father. The Marima tournament was starting soon, and the captain needed to be close to his clan. After this, Jack returned to Halaman, who had never been so happy to see him. He cried and admitted that he had already mentally said goodbye to life. The spirit had saved him from death, and now the ordeal was finally coming to an end. During this time, Jack managed to collect a large number of red flags. All he had to do was hand them over to the king and double the final result. With this simple yet precise scheme, Halaman officially brought his team victory in the challenge. The man who was considered a loser and who had failed on this floor more than once felt his heart being torn out of his chest. Joy filled him, especially at the moment when the system announced the completion of the test and the team's victory. It was like a light at the end of a long dark tunnel, and a real miracle for the most ordinary guy. As for Jack, he had accomplished everything he had come to this floor to do and was fully prepared to move on. After the final ranking calculation, he took first place, even beating Zeus. As a reward, Joshua awarded him an additional 20,000 points. It was nice to see that Halaman had also improved his position significantly, earned points, and would be able to upgrade his equipment. Christopher is ranked 11th. Probably because, as always, he refused to work in a team. Jack also took notice of Hargan, who continued to evolve rapidly and was already in the top 10. From the very beginning, he proved that he certainly had no shortage of talent and ambition. Constant growth and progress achieved through hard work have long become the meaning of life for him. Jack would really be interested in meeting this player again. Now it's time to take a break and talk about the legendary Namgung clan, one of the largest associations after the cult of the Heavenly Demon. They were rightfully considered the face of the Marima Guild, as this family produced many first-class rankers. The man who brought Namgung to such greatness was a clan leader named James. When Javier returned to his father, he honestly admitted that he had not expected the 11th floor to be such a difficult test. Even the examiner found himself directly involved in the affairs of the Olympus faction. Javier wanted to discuss what had happened with his father in detail and warn him of the impending problems. Everyone knew that Olympus was preparing a gigantomachy again, but without Hephaestus, it would be impossible to implement this plan. Jack must have caused them serious problems if they were so desperate to get rid of him. Rumors were spreading rapidly throughout the tower, and soon even Asgard would hear about them. Jack himself already resembled a bright star that higher powers would sooner or later try to extinguish. Perhaps the Marima tournament will be the most opportune moment for this. However, the main character of this story did not even think about rest. Jack passed through the 12th floor like a hurricane and then repeated the same thing on the higher levels. He impressed with his speed and agility, broke records, and collected a huge number of points in a short time. Today, local players were once again amazed by his technique. In tests requiring precision, he demonstrated a truly extraordinary level of skill. The 19th floor was completely passed, which meant the way up remained open. After some thought, Jack decided not to rush to get up and to take care of other important matters. To get a decent reward on the 20th floor, he needed to level up. To do this, it was necessary to focus on developing magical power, and a rare pill of complete healing could help here. The chance to obtain such a pill only appears once every 3 years, and the Great Morim Tournament is the only place where it can be obtained. There were only a few days left before the start of the tournament. Jack had to return to the 10th floor and apply for participation as soon as possible. This year, a huge number of participants gathered here, and the excitement reached its usual peak. Already the inhabitants of the tower were arguing about who would be able to take first place. The situation was blown up by the news that a red cloak would take part in the tournament. The odds began to shift before our eyes, and Jack instantly became one of the main favorites. Representatives of many guilds rushed to offer him cooperation. In response, they invariably heard the same phrase, "Not interested." Confusion, irritation, and outright anger were evident on their faces. Jack never hesitated for a second to refuse lucrative offers and huge amounts of money. He even rejected the dragon race, which was considered one of the strongest factions, without hesitation. Then Suriel appeared on the scene, a handsome blonde man and a staunch supporter of Xian. This man was not used to hearing refusals, but as it turned out, there is a first time for everything. He tried to captivate Jack with beautiful speeches, naively believing that this would be enough. Red Cloak was about to refuse, but suddenly saw an old acquaintance in front of him. Hargan was sure that he would definitely not be driven away here, because he and Jack had too much from the past connected them. Jack jokingly said that he was not happy to see him, but almost immediately changed his mind and invited his friend into the room. The doors closed, and they were finally free of the pesky agents who had been preventing them from taking a step without supervision. It was easy to see how much Jack's influence had grown in recent times. Now he was offered better living conditions, as if he were not a tower player, but a movie star. He became too prominent a figure and could no longer hide his presence. For Hargan, his team was progressing quickly and confidently gaining strength. He came to talk about Olympus because there were too many disturbing rumors circulating around that faction. It was said that at the Marima tournament, Olympus would try to get rid of Jack, and now he is walking on thin ice. Hera's people were everywhere, patiently waiting for the moment to reach him. Zeus himself had long since retired from the faction's affairs and was focusing on trying to conquer the 100th floor of the tower. No one has ever managed to complete it, and Zeus could have become the first in history. The origins of the conflict between Jack and Olympus led to one sinner, a blacksmith named Hephaestus. Remembering him, Jack decided to visit him personally and invited Hargan to go together. At the same time, it was a chance to check whether the master had finished working on his new creation. At the same time, Hephaestus was not in the best state of mind and had long since lost interest in the craft. After leaving Olympus, he vowed never to forge weapons of war again. Only for Jack's sake did he make an exception, receiving the opportunity to study the legendary stone. However, his regular job no longer brought him joy, and he longed for a real challenge. When the blacksmith decided to take a little rest, there was an unexpected knock on the door. On the threshold stood the same man who always came with requests and problems. Jack was not alone and brought with him a blond man who looked strikingly like Zeus. Hearing Zeus, Hephaestus was in no hurry to find out how his old friend was doing. They were once close, but now it seemed as if an unbridgeable chasm had opened between them. However, if Hargan wanted to fight, the blacksmith was ready to accept the challenge. Hephaestus found it hard to believe that the son of Zeus no longer trusted Olympus and looked at everything from the outside. Hargan sought the truth and did not want to get involved in senseless conflicts, even if it went against the family. In this, he was not at all like his legendary father. Hephaestus once forged thousands of swords, sincerely serving Olympus and believing in its ideals. It all ended after the Gigantomachy, a war that changed the fate of the tower. In ancient times, giants with monstrous strength ruled almost the entire world. The Olympians were the only ones they considered equal, and at first, an alliance arose between them. But one day Hephaestus saw the hearts of giants being pierced by swords forged by his own hands. This day became a black spot in his life and a symbol of betrayal of Olympus. In essence, the Gigantomachy was a war for absolute control of the tower. Hephaestus lost all his loved ones and vowed to have nothing more to do with Olympus. Even decades later, this pain did not go away. Although outwardly, he remained calm. Not all the giants were destroyed, and now Olympus needed weapons again. Most likely, they were going to repeat the Gigantomachy. Not wanting to dwell on the past, Hephaestus called Jack down to the basement. There he was going to show the work on which he had worked especially long and hard. For Hargan, this became a reason to finally doubt his own faction. He clenched his fist, feeling disgusted with Olympus and everything it represented. Hephaestus noticed this and realized that the guy was not as simple as he seemed. Perhaps he really was worth trusting, especially given his connection to Jack. To show his creation, the blacksmith had to remove the powerful magical chains. He carefully hid this object from prying eyes. As soon as the door was opened, a thick, dark aura erupted from the room. Hephaestus named the adamantium glove Kynane after Hades' helmet. Apparently, that helmet was also made of adamantium, and the gauntlet became his new form. Jack has plenty of strength, having fought rankers since his first days in the tower. But power alone was not enough. The right to wear Kynane had to be earned. The dark force had to test him and decide whether he was worthy of the artifact. The moment Jack put on the glove, his consciousness plunged into impenetrable darkness. An ominous eye appeared before him, carefully studying the new owner. The unknown entity tried to understand who he was and why he dared to wear Kynane.